Chapter 213. Su Ke said helplessly, "Lang Jun, you're right, but it still can't erase the fact that you put yourself in danger. You're not hurt, but it doesn't mean that what you did was not dangerous. I just hope that you'll think twice before doing anything in the future. Don't be reckless." He didn't know Jiang Pengji very well, but he knew that his Lang Jun was very capricious. It was useless to dissuade her. But if he didn't pursue it now, would he pursue it when it was over? Ha ha ha, he knew what the result would be without thinking. I know. I'll think twice before doing anything in the future. Is that okay? Jiang Pengji pointed to the sky and agreed. As long as Su Ke didn't talk about her now, she would deal with it later. She was a typical person who would admit her mistakes actively and never repent. Now, let's talk about the deployment. Jiang Pengji coughed and quickly changed the topic to avoid Su Ke's nagging. She had no way to deal with this kind of motherly person. Su Ke sighed secretly. He couldn't do anything to Jiang Pengji after all. When it came to business, Su Ke also put on a serious expression. He carefully looked at the structure of the bandits' village and came to a conclusion. The layout of the bandits' village is messy. It can be seen that this is just a small village gathered by a motley crew. In fact, most of the bandits' villages in the mountains near Hejian County were disorganized and undisciplined. With brute force and the advantage of numbers, they burned, killed, and looted everywhere. Ordinary people were unarmed and didn't put their lives on the line like the bandits. Naturally, they couldn't defeat the bandits. Although Jiang Pengji's small troop had only been trained for a month, there were veterans brought by Meng Hun. Everyone had gone through preliminary systematic training, so they were far better than the bandits in terms of organization and discipline. Even if they hadn't seen blood, they were more cooperative and efficient than the bandits. Jiang Pengji said, "That's why we chose this village first. We'll let these wolf cubs see blood first, so that their hands won't tremble when they chop off people's heads in the future." Xiaoyu, although Hejian County is not a big place, it's also a place with many hidden talents. Su Ke focused all his attention on the deployment. Listening to Jiang Pengji's words, it was obvious that there was another meaning. "Lang Jun, what do you mean? Pick the soft persimmon, and start with the small bandits. Let's use these people as practice first so that the troops can grow quickly." Jiang Pengji said. It was the same principle as killing monsters to level up. "I've searched the nearby bandit strongholds and found no less than 100 nests with about 10,000 people. Why do you think the Hejian County chief didn't send troops to eradicate such a huge hidden danger? It's not that I don't want to, but I can't do it." Meng Hun listened carefully and exclaimed, "More than 100 bandit strongholds? Nearly 10,000 bandits. How could the Hejian County chief allow them to develop and grow with such a huge hidden danger? It was simply unbelievable." Jiang Pengji pointed at the first piece of rough cloth and said, "Look at these mountains. They are steep and dangerous, and the mountains are high and the forests are deep. This is the bandits' biggest amulet. Ordinary people would be lucky if they didn't get lost, not to mention exploring the terrain and finding out the exact location of the bandits' stronghold. Hejian County has no way to deal with these bandits. The terrain is one of the problems, and the other is that these bandits communicate with each other and keep in touch with each other. In the past, Hejian County had also sent troops to suppress the bandits, but when the troops arrived, the bandits' stronghold was already empty. Not only that, these bandits also relied on their understanding of the terrain to ambush the soldiers, causing heavy losses in the previous attempts to suppress the bandits. How could they be so arrogant? Su Ke carefully looked at the simple drawing on the rough cloth and said, "If so, we must not let a single bandit escape in this operation. We must either kill them all or capture them. If one of them escapes, it will be difficult to deal with them in the future." Jiang Pengji's goal was not to kill one bandit stronghold. She intended to clean up all the bandit strongholds. If she accidentally let a small bandit escape, it would alarm other bandits' strongholds and arouse their vigilance. It would be difficult for her to take action again. That's right. So, even if it's a small bandit stronghold, we can't take it lightly. Jiang Pengji said seriously, if we can persuade them to surrender, we can recruit some of them at our discretion. If they don't repent, or if they have a criminal record, we can just kill them all. It's useless to persuade them to surrender. Keeping them will only spoil the atmosphere. When Jiang Pengji said, just kill them all, both Meng Han and Su Ku felt an invisible murderous intent. Su Ku already knew Jiang Pengji's method of expanding the troop. Although he frowned at her action, he did not oppose it. Meng Han was full of pride. Meng Han cupped his hands and praised, Lang Juan's breadth of mind is admirable. According to people's current thinking, it would be fine if the bandits were not caught. If they were caught, they would be killed. Wouldn't it be better to keep them alive? However, Jiang Pengji was willing to give them a chance to turn over a new leaf. Although it was selective, in Meng Han's view, it was kindness. The audience in the streaming room deeply felt that their views were completely different from the host and her two subordinates. Mozhang Huakai Huanhuangui, I think Chief Coach Meng Han and Accountant Su Ku seem to have misunderstood the host. How is the host being kind? She obviously doesn't have money, but she wants people, so she went to the bandits. These bandits are also pitiful. They are sitting at home, but trouble comes from the sky. Not only will their lives be in danger, but they will also have to work for the host for the rest of their lives. Lo Siji Lianmeng, it's not terrible to work for them. What's terrible is that they have to be grateful to the host while working for her. To Yuan Wala Meng, ha ha ha, the two above are calm. Muyu Qingfeng, hee hee, it's nothing. When the bandits are wiped out, the loot will probably belong to the host. To be honest, it's not easy for the bandits to live. They worked so hard to save their belongings, but they will be taken away by the Oriole. Jiang Pengji glanced at the bullet screen in the streaming room, and then continued to discuss the deployment with a calm face. Although it was a discussion, it was actually Su Ku talking, Meng Han adding, and she listening. The operation to wipe out the bandits was not only a whetstone for the troop, but also a training for Su Ku and Meng Han. After all, Meng Han was the former captain of the Mengs. He had led troops, fought in wars, and wiped out bandits. He was an experienced veteran. Compared with him, Su Ku was a rookie who had never experienced anything. Even if he was talented, it was just empty talk without experience. Chapter 214. When Jiang Pengji drew the general structure of the bandits' village, she also thought about it. Su Ku had the same thought as her. That's feasible, but there are 2 watchtowers in the village. What will you do if you want to get close to them without alerting anyone? Su Ku pondered for a while, then pointed to another place and said, this village is built on the hillside. It's hidden by the mountain, so it's hard for ordinary people to find them. It's the most natural protective barrier of the village, but it's also a fatal place. Tonight, the moonlight is clear, but the shadows are thick and gloomy. If we lurk and attack from here, the watchtower's minions may not find us. The shadow cast by the mountain was directed at the bandits' village. After all, not everyone had excellent night vision like Jiang Pengji. What's more, Lang Jun asked us to cover ourselves with branches and weeds to blend into the surrounding environment. With the night shadow and the method of cover, it's impossible for experienced veterans to find us in such a high mountain and deep forest, let alone the motley crew. Jiang Pengji glanced at Meng Han, who nodded to her and agreed with Su Ku's words. They didn't know the surrounding environment as well as the local bandits, but they still had the advantage. After all, Su Ku was good at internal affairs, not at dispatching troops. Jiang Pengji asked him to talk about her ideas just to provide more ideas. She was the one who made the final decision, and Meng Han was the one who carried it out. She was just there to hold the fort. Everyone had their own duties, and the division of labor was clear. One of Jiang Pengji's principles was, if you can do it, then do it. If you can't, then let the capable do it. If you don't have the ability, then don't compete. Meng Han obviously belonged to the capable category, so Jiang Pengji was very confident in him. Although they had fewer people now, the scale of the bandits' village they had to destroy was not large. So, as long as the deployment was right, it would not be difficult to win. The difficult thing was that Jiang Pengji wanted to catch the bandits alive and select the manpower that could be absorbed from them. If that was the case, then they couldn't kill him, and they couldn't even injure him to the point where he was half dead. Because it would take too long to recover, and they also needed to invest energy and extra money. It was not cost-effective in terms of investment. Meng Han seemed to be reckless, but he was actually very careful. After comprehensive consideration, he had a plan in his mind. I'll go to the sergeants and instruct them on the raid tonight. Meng Han cupped his hands and left. Well, you can go now. The size of the troop was still very small, so for the time being, there were 5 people in the troop. To increase the pressure and motivation of the troops, Jiang Pengji also formulated a series of rules and regulations when she established the troops. For example, there was a monthly assessment for the selection of sergeants. Nongqin was one of them. The sergeant sat on the other sergeant's end and tried to keep a distance from Nongqin. Nongqin Yao Kupeng. And Nongqin. Just a few days ago, there was a reshuffle within the troop to select a new corporal. Nongqin was the only one who got the position. This time, no one dared to speak ill of her behind her back, because she had passed all the trials in the drill ground in front of everyone. No one knew that the girl who usually looked quiet and unassuming could be so ruthless when she fought. In terms of strength, she wasn't as strong as these men, but her attacks were extremely cunning and fast. Many people didn't even have time to react before their hands were clamped behind their backs, unable to move and kneeling on the ground. There was also an ignorant boy who bullied Nongqin because she was a girl and tried to attack her chest. Who knew that the boy almost lost his penis? They were men. They didn't know how women felt when their breasts were grabbed, but they knew that if their family jewels were kicked, it would be so painful that they would grimace in pain and curl up on the ground, unable to straighten their backs. Fortunately, that kid was slow and didn't manage to grab it. Otherwise, they had every reason to believe that Nongqin would have crushed the boy's penis with her feet. He could not have fooled around with any girl, but he had to provoke this Rakshasa's daughter. Meng Han explained the details of the deployment to everyone. Do any of you have any questions about this? Except for Nongqin, the other sergeants were all trained by him. They had a tacit understanding with each other and he trusted their abilities. They were all experienced veterans, much better than the servants Jiang Pengji bought from the broker house. It was normal for them to be sergeants. The other sergeants all shook their heads, indicating that there was no problem. Meng Han was secretly satisfied and then he turned his eyes to Nongqin who was silent. Do you have any questions? Nongqin frowned and said, What you mean is that we should catch all the bandits alive and try not to cause too much damage. She couldn't imagine what was the use of keeping those bandits alive. That's right. Meng Han added, This is also Leng Juan's idea. We are short of people now. Nongqin nodded and said, I understand. We will do as Leng Juan says. Jiang Pengji gave Nongqin a crash course. Most of the skills and methods she taught were assassination and sneak attacks, which emphasized on miraculous effects. She needed to make others acknowledge her in the shortest time possible, instead of denying her because she was a girl. If it was a head-on confrontation, Nongqin might not be able to withstand it, but she felt she was competent for sneak attacks. Meng Han said, If there is no objection, we will take action at 11 o'clock. According to Jiang Pengji's observation, the shift at the gate of the bandit stockade and the lookout tower was also regular. According to Jiang Pengji's observation, the shift was about 4 hours. At 11 o'clock, it was the first shift after dinner. It was late at night and people were sleepy and tired, so they were not focused. It was the right time to launch a sneak attack. Of course, in order to prevent her people from being too tired, Jiang Pengji asked them to take a nap in advance to recharge. Covered with weeds and branches, it was hard to find the troops even in the daytime, not to mention in the dark night. Jiang Pengji played with the improved crossbow with 2 arrows beside her. When the time was up, she would immediately take action and kill the 2 minions in the lookout tower first. Without the lookout tower, no one would find the troops in advance, so the entire bandit stockade was nothing to worry about. After getting everything ready, Jiang Pengji turned her head and saw Su Ku looking at the sky with a sad but beautiful look. "Are you crying?" Su Ku was confused. He looked at her with clear eyes and asked seriously, "Lang Jun, what do you mean?" Jiang Pengji thought about the bullet screen of the old driver in the streaming room. In fact, she was also one of the people who had been enlightened, but she didn't understand the joke before. She said seriously, "Raising your head can make your tears flow back." Su Ku was speechless. One could imagine how the audience in the streaming room laughed. How could they expect an ancient person to understand the pain of non-mainstream teenagers in their era? Chapter 215. Astrology? What's so interesting about all the stars in the sky? So, what do you see? Astrological divination and whatnot, in her opinion, were all nonsense. It was ridiculous to talk about gods and spirits with someone who had fought in the galaxy and wandered around a few planets. Su Ku didn't know what Jiang Pengji was thinking. He said honestly, "I'm not good at astrology. I can only see that there's something strange about Ziwei Star." He wasn't like the other aristocratic families who had a lot of educational resources. He didn't even have enough books to read, let alone a famous teacher. It could be said that in the month he stayed in the Lu residence, he had read dozens or even hundreds of times more books than before. How could a commoner compare to the accumulation of knowledge of an aristocratic family? Su Ku couldn't even be considered a commoner now. At most, he was a lowly commoner who carried a crime on his back. "There's something strange about Ziwei Star?" "What do you mean?" Jiang Pengji looked up at the stars in the sky. She couldn't figure out anything. Su Ku hugged his knees and pointed at the bright star in the sky. He said, "Lang Jun, look. That's Ziwei Star. It's bright and dark, and there's a heart flickering around it. It's a jinx. It means that there's a hidden danger around Ziwei Star." Jiang Pengji sneered and said, "It's just a few stars. What do you mean by corresponding lifespan? It's nonsense." Su Ku was stunned. Why didn't she follow the script? He tilted his head and saw his Lang Jun hugging her knees beside him. Her side profile was a little blurred by the night, but the light in her eyes was especially bright in the dark. Jiang Pengji said in a gentle voice, "I don't think there's any basis for astrology. Those shining stars are celestial bodies or suns that are very far away from us. They seem unreachable, but the future is hard to predict. You said that Ziwei Star represents an emperor, but the world is divided into 5 countries. There are 5 emperors. Xiaoyu, which one do you think Ziwei Star represents?" Su Ku was stumped by her question. He thought for a while and said, "I don't know why you think so, but astrology may not be nonsense. The layman watches the show, while the expert sees the artistry. As for Ziwei Star, in my opinion, there's only one emperor. The rest are all fake emperors." Jiang Pengji listened attentively, to the point that Su Ku thought he had convinced her. Unexpectedly, she suddenly burst into laughter. Her expression was a little painful as she tried to hold back her laughter. "Xiaoyu, this is the first time I've realized that you're kind of cute." Jiang Pengji laughed for a long time, which made Su Ku feel embarrassed. He secretly gritted his teeth and suppressed his temper. He asked, "Lang Jun, are you playing tricks on me again? No, no. I never meant that. Jiang Pengji said this, but she still had a smile on her face. It was not convincing. When she was done laughing, she continued, an emperor is never determined by a single star. The same goes for fate. She believed that old monk Chen could see the emperor's purple aura, but she didn't believe that the purple aura could prove anything. Even monk Liao Chen himself said that the purple qi could not guarantee that she would ascend to the 9-5 realms in the future. In the end, these things were all illusory. After a while, Jiang Pengji asked, Xiaoyu, is it difficult for poor people to study? Su Ke didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lang Jun, aren't you asking the obvious? Jiang Pengji said, maybe, in another 10 or even 20 or 30 years, everyone will be able to afford it. It's not a privilege for a small group of people. He didn't expect that to be what she was going to say. He almost couldn't react for a moment. He said with some yearning, if that's the case, it will definitely be a peaceful and prosperous era that everyone yearns for. Lo Siji Lianmeng, I had a feeling that the streamer's streaming room will be broadcast for a long time, maybe a lifetime. I'm a person without perseverance. Maybe I'll give up after a month or two, but now I feel that I'll keep going, maybe for a lifetime. Not for anything else, but for the streamer's words just now, I also want to see such a peaceful and prosperous era. Paid axing, this once again proves that this streaming room is very positive, even if the streamer has no morals. Cafeteria Dafen Anti, Lo Siji Lianmeng, unruly people, this is my confession to the streamer. Nongfu Shanquan Yudiangshuan, hey! Yao Yao Ling? There's a group of unruly people who want to compete with me for my favor. I'll reward them with 10 feet of red. There will be. Everything will be there. Jiang Pengji looked at the sky and calculated the time. But we have to take it one step at a time. If we go too far, we'll easily pull our balls. We can't be fat even if we eat a mouthful of rice. Before we realize this lofty and ambitious dream, we have to get rid of the bandits first. Su Ke was dumbfounded. Lo Siji Lianmeng, I feel sorry for Su Ke every day. Yaoling Shu Shu, sorry +1. I always feel that the streamer likes to make Su Ke's blood boil, or when he's about to burst into tears, she suddenly says something that kills the mood and destroys the atmosphere. It's so embarrassing. Even a normal person will get cancer of embarrassment. Tao Dainio, I believe that this is the streamer's bad taste for Su Ke's teenage love. I don't know if it's love, but it's definitely a bad taste. Here, put it on. Don't catch a cold. Jiang Pengji threw the cloak that her maid had prepared for her to Su Ke and let him put it on. The weather had warmed up a lot. Many people had put on their spring clothes, which were made of thin material. Su Ke was no exception. But he had underestimated the temperature in the deep mountains. The air was still damp, and it was cold to the bone. Holding the cloak, Su Ke hesitated for a long time before he put it on. The lining of the cloak was made of rabbit fur. It was not thick, but it was very warm. It immediately separated him from the cold outside, and his thighs and arms did not have to shiver in the cold. Lang Jun, aren't you afraid of the cold? Su Ke asked. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, it's so cold. How can it be cold? I'm not a delicate little boy who's afraid of the cold. Su Ke looked down at himself, who was tightly wrapped, and then at his Lang Jun, who was dressed in neat clothes. He was suspicious and kept silent. Let's stop talking. Time's up. As soon as she finished speaking, Meng Han had secretly commanded a troop to hide in the shadows and approach the entrance of the stockade village. The sergeant of the troop was Nongqin. Jiang Pengji held a crossbow in one hand and pulled the string with the other. Her snow-white wrist was exposed, which looked particularly delicate in the cold moonlight. She easily put an arrow on the bow and aimed at the watchtower nearly 300 meters away. Whoosh, the arrow shot out, and there was a slight sound of breaking air. She calmly put the second arrow on the bow, and it was also neat. The time difference was less than 1 second. 2 small minions of the watchtower were killed by an arrow through the heart. Half of their bodies were on the crossbar, and blood was gurgling. At the same time, the troop led by Nongqin also took action. 2 breaths later, there were 3 bodies lying at Nongqin's feet. She smiled shyly at the sergeant. She didn't want to kill anyone, but she practiced the art of assassination, so she casually broke the man's neck. Chapter 216. With the arrows as an order, many black figures sneaked into the bandit stockade, hiding in the shadows like ghosts. Nongqin's face was cold, and her eyes were dark and frighteningly cold. It was probably because it was not the first time that she had killed someone, so she was very calm. Her mind was not filled with fear or hesitation, but the voice of her Lang Jun when he taught her how to kill. Her mind was clearer than ever. Every time she sent someone to heaven, she became calmer. At that moment, she understood why her Lang Jun said that some feelings could not be expressed in words, and only by doing it herself could she understand it. Her hands were steady and scary, but there was a burning impulse in her chest that could spread to her limbs and burn all her senses. She was no longer a lowly servant girl who could be bullied by the servants. On the contrary, her hands could now control other people's lives. Crack! The sound of bones breaking rang in the silent night. She threw the dead bandits aside and didn't even bother to look at them. Looking at her subordinates, Nongqin curled her lips and made a few hand gestures to give orders. Under such circumstances, verbal communication would expose one's position and alert the enemy. Due to the technological level of this era, Jiang Pengji couldn't make any epoch-making communication equipment. She simply used the simple hand gestures she learned in the military school and forced every member of the troop to remember every hand gesture. Some of the members had teased Nongqin before, but now they were so scared by her that their legs became weak. They didn't dare to look down on her anymore. She was not a female worm, but a female Rakshasa. She didn't move much, but she quickly grabbed the enemy's neck with both hands. In the blink of an eye, the neck was broken. Seeing that, the members couldn't help but touch their necks secretly, and they felt a chill down their spine. Their necks were the same, but looking at Nongqin's movements, they felt that the bandits' necks were made of paper. Their necks were all the same, but looking at Nongqin's movements, they felt that the bandits' necks were made of paper. Damn it! Burp. That girl is so delicate and tender. It's a pity that we don't know when we will get our turn. Boss and the others really don't know how to restrain themselves. They have already killed a few of them. Every time, we can only watch them eat the meat, and we can't even drink the leftovers. A bandit loosened his belt, took out something, and scattered it on the grass. When he spoke, his breath reeked of alcohol. The tip of his thick nose was red, and his eyes were slightly squinted, looking a little misty. His companion laughed and said, "He's the boss. If he doesn't eat meat, do you think he'll let you eat? Why don't you take a piss and look at yourself? Go, go, go." When did I say that? The bandit from before released his stock. His stomach, which had been suffocating for a long time, finally felt a little better. He hurriedly shook his body, intending to fasten his belt. This is such a desolate place, and there's no woman to relieve my boredom. Isn't it too suffocating? Boss and the others are having fun every time. That sound can be heard from the entrance of the village. I'm not allowed to complain anymore. His partner laughed at him. Hey, you can just say that you miss girls. That bandit spat out a mouthful of saliva. Bah, I want to, but you dare to say you don't want to? The two of them had a night patrol mission, so they did not dare to sneak out for too long. They fastened their belts and prepared to rush back. Wait! Just as they were about to leave, the bandit was stopped by his partner. He said angrily, "If you want girls, go find them. Don't hold my hand. Get lost. Seriously, look over there. Isn't there something there?" Hearing this, the two of them looked at each other and felt a little uneasy. They were afraid that there were poisonous snakes or monsters hiding in the grass. When they thought of what they had just done, their hearts beat faster and faster, and their hands and feet began to become cold. "It seems to be a person, go and see." "It's a person?" Before the bandit could react, his partner pushed him from behind. He lost his balance and fell into the grass. His face was stained with turbid liquid, which was suffocating. At the same time, his hands touched a strange cold soft object. Ghost. The bandit was so scared that he forgot where he was. He suddenly jumped up from the ground and crawled in the opposite direction. The other partner was also shocked. His hand trembled, and he directly threw away the flint in his hand. "What are you shouting for?" Just as the two of them were scared out of their wits and were about to run away together, their leader came looking for them. "There is a ghost, boss. There. It's a cold ghost." The bandit in front was scared out of his wits. His liquid-stained face was full of horror, and he pointed at the grass with trembling hands. "What the hell?" After the leader heard this, he was anxious, but he didn't want to lose face as a bandit leader. He calmed himself down and said stubbornly, "I'd like to see what kind of thing is playing tricks on me. Two good-for-nothings. How could they be so scared?" He took a step forward and kicked the grass. Sure enough, he kicked a heavy object, which scared the boss immediately. However, it was also because of this that the heavy object flipped over, revealing a face that was dripping with blood and had its eyes wide open. Under the bleak moonlight, it seemed especially terrifying. This man died with a grievance, and his neck was twisted in a weird way. They were shocked at first, but then they quickly realized that this man, wasn't he the gatekeeper, but face? Nonsense. What the hell? Someone is attacking the stronghold. The boss reacted quickly. He was so angry that his veins were popping and his eyes were like bells. Attacking the stronghold? At this time? The other two bandits also came to their senses, but they were so scared that their limbs went limp. For a moment, they couldn't even stand up. Good-for-nothings. The boss cursed, turned around, and ran while shouting, "Wake up, there is an attack." Whoosh, there was a slight sound of something breaking through the air. An arrow streaked across the night sky like a streak of silver light, piercing through the man's neck from one side and exiting from the other. "Oh, a fish that escaped the net." A voice as cold as water came from above. Jiang Pengji was standing on a nearby roof, and the crossbow in her hand had just fallen. The two bandits were scared out of their wits. They watched as the bandit leader's neck burst into a beautiful flower of blood, and the thick smell of blood spread. Then, with a bang, they fell to the ground. It was too fast for them to react. Hearing the voice, the two of them turned their necks stiffly. The person was reflected in the moonlight, holding a strange crossbow in his hand. The person's eyes seemed to be stained with frost, and it was frighteningly cold. "Capture these two as well." Jiang Pengji glanced at the two frightened bandits and said to the troops who rushed over, "Search this stronghold again to see if there are any fish that escaped the net. If they are obedient, keep them alive. If they resist, kill them directly." Chapter 217. Tut, 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 Xiaoyu, look, some of these bandits were forced to become bandits, and some of them just want to reap without sowing and rely on robbing other people's labor resources. They work hard to farm for a year, but it's not as much as the profit of one job for these bandits. The hall was filled to the brim with boxes. Jiang Pengji crossed her legs and leaned against the main seat as if she had no bones. She pointed at the opened boxes below with her fair fingers, and her eyes swept over the bandits who were tied up with their hands tied behind their backs in a mocking manner. Su Ku looked at the things in the boxes. The blue veins on his forehead bulged, and he felt a little uneasy. He was not worried about what would happen to these bandits. He was just worried that his Lang Jun would get addicted to beating bandits and get carried away. Although, he also felt good about it. Meng Han sat on the chair of the second master of the bandit village. In contrast, Su Ku looked much more gentle. Meng Han asked in a fierce voice, "Lang Jun, what should we do with these people? Are they all like this, or just like this?" Meng Han made two very obvious gestures. When the bandits saw this, they all shivered, their legs trembled, and tears and mucus flowed down their cheeks. "My lords, please spare my life. I was forced into this den of thieves. I've never done anything evil in the past, please spare my life. I have children and old people to take care of. I'm responsible for the family's livelihood. If I die, how can my 60-year-old mother and my 3-year-old son survive? Please, I was also forced into this place by that black-hearted man. Please spare my life." In order to survive, one by one, they began to act pitiful. Some desperately kowtowed and begged for mercy, some wanted to sell the secret of the bandit stronghold in order to get a chance to live, and some people spoke with tears in their eyes, trying to move people with their emotions. Those tragic stories made people feel sad. However, no matter what they said or how they acted, Su Ku just looked at them coldly. Meng Han looked like it was none of his business. The real mastermind, Jiang Pengji, looked at each and every one of them with a faint smile, as if she was watching a monkey show. "Don't be in a hurry to deal with these people." Jiang Pengji put her fingers together and pretended to be thinking. Then she turned her head and asked Su Ku, "Are all the things found in this village here? How much grain and money are there in total?" Su Ku lowered his head and looked at the bamboo slip that he had made some simple records on. He said, "There are about 300 dawn of grain, and about 700 taels of money and silk." This was only a rough estimate. After all, they were in a hurry, so they would have to wait until they got back. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, 300 dawn of grain, 700 taels of silver. That's more than your Lungjuan's monthly allowance for a few years." Su Ku secretly rolled his eyes. In terms of money, Jiang Pengji's monthly allowance in the Lus was indeed not much. It was only a few taels a month. But after taking into account the snacks, brushes, ink, paper, inkstones, clothes and fabrics, and especially the expensive bamboo paper outside, how could she be considered poor? Pack up and bring all these things back. Jiang Pengji smiled faintly and waved her hand. She looked more like a bandit than the head of a bandit. "Brothers, you've worked hard today. When we get back, each of you will get 1 tael of silver and 1 jean of pork. You should make up for your hard training." As for where the expenses would come from, of course, it would be the confiscated bandits' supplies. How many people were there in the troop? It was just a small reward, which was not painful at all. Instead, it could win people's hearts and stimulate their fighting spirit. How could it not be worth it? In addition, each corporal get 1 more share. Of course, the treatment of ordinary troops and corporal had to be different, so that they could clearly realize that if they wanted to get better treatment, they had to train hard and climb up. "Write it down." Su Ku nodded while writing. Jiang Pengji naturally did not forget Su Ku and Meng Han. Each of them got 10 taels of silver. In addition, Meng Han got a few more jars of wine and 5 jean of pork, while Su Ku got a few bolts of good quality cotton cloth and some health herbs of equal value. The arrangement was made purely because Meng Han was single. He had to feed himself, and Su Ku had to take care of his aunt. In front of a group of bandits, Jiang Pengji's attitude was particularly natural. It was as if she was not distributing the money in someone else's pocket, but her own. Well, it did belong to her now. She waved her hand, and Su Ku understood. He asked his men to move the big boxes to the open space. Next, it was time to deal with the bandits. You bandits. Kill me if you want. The leader of the bandits who was captured had a gloomy face. Everyone. The audience in the streaming room watched happily as Jiang Pengji distributed the loot. Then they were shocked by the words of the leader of the bandits. Lanlian Junzi, awesome. That's awesome. Lo Siji Lianmeng, ha ha ha, host, did you hear that? Even the leader of the bandits called you a bandit. What does that mean? Muyu Qingfeng, indifferent face. It means that the host is the leader of the bandits. The bandits worked hard to save their belongings by robbing merchants, but the host took them all at once. Wasn't he the bandit of the bandits? Kill me if you want. Jiang Pengji clapped her hands and smiled. You have guts. Then go to hell. Everyone was silent. They thought that Jiang Pengji would appreciate the man's courage, but they didn't expect that she would say such a thing. In fact, you won't survive even if you don't say it. Jiang Pengji sneered and broke the bandit's neck. The blood from the bandit's mouth and tongue stained the back of her hand. Nongqin quickly handed her a handkerchief. She took it with her left hand and threw the bandit's body aside with her right hand. She wiped the blood on her hand with the handkerchief without frowning. Now, who wants to tell me that I can kill you if I want? Huh? Who dares to say that? The strong and cold aura was suffocating. The bandits had an illusion that they would be the next one. Capable people are tough and unyielding. That's worth appreciating. But a scum dares to challenge me. Who else but him will die? Jiang Pengji curled her lips and wiped the blood on the back of her hand. She put away the handkerchief instead of throwing it on the ground. She glanced at the crowd, but no one dared to look at her. People cherished their lives, even those bandits who risked their lives. Meng Han followed behind Jiang Pengji with a knife in his hand. If she frowned at someone, Meng Han would cut off that person's head. Without the slightest sign and without the slightest bit of preparation, the group of bandits were scared out of their wits. Their crotches heated up, and many of them were scared to the point of urinating. The scene was silent. Only the increasingly bloody smell and the occasional sound of blood splashing could be heard. Heads flew and fell to the ground. The audience in the live streaming room was so scared that they even forgot to send messages. Chapter 218. Do you know why I killed them? Jiang Pengji walked around and finally returned to her seat. She put her fingers together and put on an inscrutable look. Because they deserve to die. If I don't kill them now, do I have to keep them alive until the new year? Pigs could be slaughtered and eaten during the new year. What value could these people create by keeping them alive? Jiang Pengji said, there are 3 things I hate the most in my life. The first is betrayal, the second is rape, and the third is deceit. No matter who it is, I don't need to care about their feelings when they meet these 3 bottom lines. Not to mention killing them, even if I cut off all of their heads, who could say anything about it? Bandits should be prepared to lose their heads. However, there's a way out for you now. The bandits who were killed could not have betrayed Jiang Pengji or deceived her. The only reason was that they had a history of rape. Many bandits came to their senses, and their faces turned pale. They thought about it carefully, and it seemed to be true. Those who were still alive today, although they weren't good people, at least they weren't involved in this. It wasn't that they didn't want to, it was purely because those women were snatched away and given to the bandits who had a reputation first. They were just small minions, running errands. Those delicate and tender young ladies would not live long enough for them to have a taste of them. They would have long been toyed to death. I know there are no good people among you. Jiang Pengji said again. She instantly extinguished the wishful thinking that the bandits had just had. If we take them in, who knows if we will raise a tiger in our bosom? After all, you can cause some trouble if you gather together. What Jiang Pengji said was actually what Su Ku was worried about. The size of their troops was too small. If they took in all the bandits, the consequences would be unimaginable if the bandits gathered together and caused trouble. It is impossible to know what is in a man's heart. You bandits cannot be trusted at all. So, I am very troubled now. Should I let you all live or should I kill all of you to prevent future troubles? Jiang Pengji smiled and showed her white teeth. The bandits were so scared that they did not dare to make a sound. Su Ku thought about it and stepped out. Lang Jun, if we kill all of them, I am afraid it will harm the heavens. I have a plan. Jiang Pengji said, tell me about it. Su Ku deliberately raised his voice. Why don't we keep them for a month? If they perform well, we'll give them a chance to turn over a new leaf. If they don't, we'll sell them to the broker house. Now that the people are in dire straits, it is not advisable to kill too much. If they were sold to a human trafficker, they would at least be able to get a few taels of silver. It could be considered as squeezing the last bit of value out of them. Su Ku knew his Lungjuan's temperament very well. If he could avoid being taken advantage of, he would not allow himself to be taken advantage of. Although these bandits were enslaved, they were still alive. If they were lucky, their lives would be stable in the future. No matter what, being alive was everything. The bandits were frightened again and again. At this time, they no longer had the slightest intention to resist, or rather, even if they did not dare to show it. Jiang Pengji and her people killed without hesitation. They were more like a gang of bandits than them. They were bandits, but Jiang Pengji and her gang were robbers. Jiang Pengji nodded as she listened. Soon after, she pretended to be distressed and asked, but what if they secretly gather to cause trouble? Su Ku answered coldly, kill them without mercy. The words kill without mercy caused many bandits to tremble uncontrollably, and their entire bodies trembled. Jiang Pengji smiled and immediately asked the bandits in a gentle way, did you hear that? If you are willing to live, I will let you live for a month. If your performance is satisfactory, you can live. If not, you will be directly sold to the slave house. If you dare to gather people to cause trouble and secretly violate my taboo. Look at your brothers lying next to you. After that, Jiang Pengji patted the armrest of the main seat with her palm, and the wooden armrest immediately collapsed. In a few words, she extinguished the little bit of luck and unwillingness in the hearts of these bandits. The shadow of death would always linger around them. At this time, a troop secretly whispered to Nongqin. After hearing it, a trace of suppressed anger appeared on her face. Jiang Pengji noticed it and asked her, what's wrong, Nongqin? Lang Jun, there is a cellar in this bandit stronghold, which is full of kidnapped children and women. Cellar? Jiang Pengji looked at those bandits who were still alive and said coldly, what's going on here? Several bandits blushed and wanted to say something, but because of the previous shock and nervousness, they couldn't say a word. A clever one quickly kowtowed and said, the women and children in the cellar have nothing to do with us. How could there be any law when they were bandits who robbed houses? They robbed everything they could, including money and people. A group of bandits, all male, naturally had physiological needs. When they saw a beautiful woman, they naturally had sexual desires. Jiang Pengji sneered and said, go and have a look. Watch these people closely. If anyone dares to struggle, kill him directly. Her words made those who wanted to beg for mercy stiffen, and they dared not make any noise. The air in the cellar was very turbid, and there was a lot of excrement in the corner. Smelling it made people feel like stomach acid was surging. There were 2 haggard women and 3 timid 7- or 8-year-old girls hiding in the cellar. The women's clothes were ragged, and the ragged material could only cover the important parts. The exposed skin was bruised, full of violence and ambiguity, which made people know at a glance that she had suffered a nightmare. The audience in the live streaming room was still immersed in the previous fear. Seeing such a miserable scene, they all sent bullet screams. Those bandits should die thousands of times. As for the 3 children, they were so thin that their bones could be seen. Their chins were very sharp, their cheeks were sunken, and their hair was dry and yellow, curled into clumps. No one knew how long they hadn't been washed. They were so thin that their eyes were especially big. Suko followed them and knew what had happened. He was suddenly speechless and didn't know what to say. It was not a peaceful era. It seemed to be flashy, but there were endless grievances and darkness behind it. The women and children locked in the cellar were just one of thousands of examples. Bring these people back as well. Jiang Pengji's voice was very gentle, but those people were trembling at the same time, as if she was about to kill. Su Ku asked, if I take them back, what should I do with them? Chapter 219. Can a man give birth to a child? Last month, 1,275 plus monthly votes. Jiang Pengji didn't know how to raise useless people. She didn't have that kind of compassion. She had to ensure that the people under her could create value. Otherwise, they were useless. What was the point of keeping them? Therefore, even if she wanted to take them back, she wanted them to create value and contribute to the labor force. Su Ku calculated in his mind and said, I'll listen to you. You don't have enough food and money? Jiang Pengji asked. She didn't want to rely too much on the lose. Except for the initial capital, she had to find ways to get the rest of the expenses. For example, the money she won from the Fulai gambling house. She left some for Nongqin and gave the rest to Su Ku to raise the troops. If he told her that he was short of money, she would probably go to the gambling house to have fun. Su Ku shook his head. We still have enough. But your goal is not limited to this. We should always plan well so that we don't have enough money when the time comes. How many people were there in the troops? Even if they counted the bandits who hadn't been trained yet, there were only about 100 of them. The expenses were not high. Jiang Pengji gave them plenty of money, not to mention the loot they got from the robbery that night. It was enough to support the troops for a few years. However, his Lengjuan's ambition was not limited to that. It was impossible to satisfy a troop of only 100 people. That was a pain in the ass. As a bookkeeper, Su Ku naturally had to make arrangements in all aspects. He tried his best to divide 1 coin into 2 coins. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms and looked at Su Ku from head to toe. She said, not bad. You look like a bookkeeper. Su Ku didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Lang Jun, please don't make fun of me. To be honest, he used to think that a bookkeeper's job was easy until he met his Lang Jun. Whether a bookkeeper's job was easy or not depended on whether the boss was noisy or not. Jiang Pengji left a few people behind to guard the bandits and took them away in batches. As for the treasures that they had collected, they were transported back. While the sky was still dark, they had to leave as soon as possible to avoid alerting the other bandits. There were too many bandits around Hejian County. If their actions were exposed and alerted, it would not be easy next time. Xiaoyu, go back and see if anyone is injured. Give them more supplements so that they won't be disappointed. On the way back, Jiang Pengji suddenly said, there are rewards and punishments. Good and bad punishments are clear. That way, people won't be agitated, and we can nip the hidden dangers in the bud. Su Ku nodded. Don't worry, Lang Jun. I will definitely get it done. After a busy night, the troops went to sleep in batches. Another group of people were guarding the bandits who were still tied up to prevent them from causing trouble. The farm was large enough, and there were many empty rooms. Su Ku ordered his men to clean up the other 2 large rooms and turn them into bunk beds. He gave each captured bandit a bed. In order to prevent them from rebelling, they were carefully separated and assigned to the previous troops to be regrouped with each other. Because there were more people, the daily expenses also increased. Su Ke still had a lot of miscellaneous things to do, and he only finished it at noon. Su Ke had seen the Liu family's internal account book recording method and felt that it was very clear, so he simply copied it and used it on the troops. The account book was clear and concise, and the accounts were clear and transparent. It was very useful. He calculated the rewards that should be distributed and was silently calculating how many pigs to buy in his heart. His aunt's voice came from outside the house. "Aunt, why are you here?" Su Ke put down what he was doing and got up to open the door. "Didn't the master reward me with a few bolts of cloth? I think it's not bad. I plan to measure it and make 2 sets of spring clothes for you." Su Ke's aunt was a very gentle woman, but she worked hard all year round to make a living. Her hands were full of frostbite, and her eyes were much worse under the hardship. It was a bit difficult for her to sew, but Su Ke didn't stop her. After all, it was the elders' kindness. How could the younger generation refuse? Besides, the farm was too idle. If she didn't find something for herself to do, she would be very bored every day. Su Ke welcomed her in. "Why can you only do it for me? Aunt, you have to take care of yourself." "Hey, Aunt, how old are you? Why are you dressed so well? You are working for the master, so you should dress decently." His aunt disagreed. "Ah, you wear the same few sets of clothes. It shows how much the master mistreats you." Su Ke coughed awkwardly and said, "Aunt, Ke brought you here to take care of you when you are old. Don't do the hard work. Make new clothes that need to be made and wear what needs to be worn. There is no need to save. Now that Lang Jun thinks highly of me, I will have a better life in the future." His aunt glanced at him and said, "How can anyone live like you, Aunt? You don't have to save for me. In the future, I will buy a few maidservants to serve you. I will treat you like the old madam. You are talking nonsense like you used to. Don't talk about buying maidservants to serve me. If you can bring a maidservant back to continue the Su family's lineage, I will have to worship my ancestors." His aunt put her hands together, and Su Ke didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "This matter is not urgent. When I find someone I like, I will definitely tell Aunt and let you talk to the matchmaker." Su Ke's aunt was an open-minded and optimistic woman. She didn't rush Su Ke when he said so. However, there were still some things that needed to be said to him. A family like ours is not picky. If there is someone suitable and considerate to you, you can marry her. Su Ke just smiled and didn't give a clear answer. His mind was not on this. He had to finish the things at hand first. At least he had a foundation to establish himself. Besides, his mother's mourning period was not over yet. It was too early to talk about marriage. System: Streamer Jiang Pengji's semi-interactive live broadcast of bandit suppression in the Deep Mountains, 1, has come to a perfect end. Dear viewers, are you satisfied with this? A. Satisfied, B. Average, C. Not satisfied. It was time to conclude the voting again. This time, satisfaction was within expectations. After all, not everyone in the live broadcast could accept her killing, and she didn't want to change her plan for the audience. She thought that it would be good enough if she could pass the satisfaction level. She didn't expect to get a silver treasure chest. When she heard the system message, she opened it directly and chose to draw a prize. It was another card. She clamped the card with 2 fingers and turned it over. There was a picture of a fat white baby curled up on the card. When she saw the small line of words at the bottom, her face was about to crack. Easy pregnancy pill, the young phoenix's voice is auspicious. Once chosen by the king, she will be doted on. However, no flower will bloom for 100 days. She will only sigh at the changing heart of her husband. If she has a baby by her side, she will definitely stand at the top of the harem and look at the flowers with a smile. Usage, take it before sex. Jiang Pengji chuckled. System, can you be any more F***king useless? The system was about to explode. Jiang Pengji. That's enough. I am the harem intrigue system. What else can I give you? Jiang Pengji clicked her tongue and took the card. Is there a system that allows men to have children? System, as a harem intrigue system, you don't even have the ability to have children. How dare you say you are not useless? System. Chapter 220. System, what kind of decent system would do something like that? It was so pissed off by its terrible host. Jiang Pengji only responded with a cold snort. System. How could it be considered decent? A famous item to attract men's interest in their own bodies? An easy pregnancy pill to solidify men's love for them? It was really decent. It was a typical example of a whore trying to maintain her chastity. Jiang Pengji glanced at the 2 cards in her backpack. She seemed to be deep in thought. After a long time, she said, speaking of which, it seems that in the past half a month, you haven't sent me a real-time trigger mission. Why? Did you secretly uninstall this section? System clicked its tongue and said, how is that possible? After the section is loaded, you can only uninstall it after the second system upgrade. As for why there hasn't been a single trigger mission. Honestly, host, tell me seriously, how many times have you gone out in the past half a month? Other than going to the farm, she would stay at home and read. It was so boring that it was hard for the live stream viewers to watch. Jiang Pengji pinched her chin and said, what you mean is that if I go out more often, I might trigger a mission? System answered in a business-like manner, in theory, yes. The so-called real-time trigger mission is when the system analyzes the people and things that the host has experienced and determines that there is a need for a mission. Only then will it send a mission to the host. The more people you know and the more things you encounter, the higher the possibility of triggering a mission. But, I suggest that you let nature take its course. Jiang Pengji laughed and asked, let nature take its course? Yes, the system just did an analysis and found that you have the intention to go against the system. This is not good for you. The first time the system issued a real-time triggered mission, not only did the host decisively refuse to carry it out, but he even calmly accepted the punishment. After the mission was completed, the system was 99% sure that the host wanted to cause trouble again. Don't be so paranoid. No matter what, we're in a temporary partnership. We're in the same boat. What good will it do me if I deliberately go against you? Jiang Pengji spread her hands to show that she had no ill intentions. The system's answer was silence. Although it hadn't been with Jiang Pengji for long, the system already understood that it could only trust half of what she said. After a long while, the system finally spoke. I am very happy that the host can finally understand the pains of being a system. I will not harm you. I hope that we can get along well in the future. The system and Jiang Pengji seemed to have reached an alliance and restored a harmonious relationship. In fact, they were like 2 businessmen shaking hands with a smile. Each of them held a sharp dagger behind their backs, ready to plot against the other at any time and then find an opportunity to stab the other in the back. Jiang Pengji only returned to the Lu residence when it was close to dinner time. When she returned, she heard from the gatekeeper that Lu Shi was waiting for her in the study. Frowning slightly, she lightly said, I understand. I'll go see my father now. Why was Lu Shi looking for her? Jiang Pengji had a vague guess. It was either related to the bandit suppression the night before or there was news from Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. Although she did not take the initiative to tell Lu Shi about the bandit extermination, she did not deliberately hide it from him. The farm was kept a secret from outsiders, but not from Lu Shi. It was normal for him to know about it. As soon as he arrived at the study, he saw Lu Shi sitting upright with a slight frown on his face. His fingers were flipping through the booklet on the table. He was engrossed in reading. As usual, Jiang Pengji first saluted him. Then she said, "Father, what can I do for you?" Lu Shi then raised his head and gestured for Jiang Pengji to sit beside him. "You." Lu Shi was about to say something, but he suddenly stopped. He looked a little hesitant. "Are you hurt?" Jiang Pengji was sure that was not what Lu Shi wanted to say before. She shook her head and said, "No, I'm not hurt. A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. But I know you well. It's useless to persuade you." Lu Shi sighed softly. Then, he smiled with some pride. Most of those bandits are the kind of people who only know how to steal and steal. They don't know the word loyalty, and they don't know the word loyalty. I won't object to your decision, but you have to be careful in case they plot against you behind your back. Jiang Pengji said, "Of course. The troops are short of manpower. If we take in more bandits than the original troops, there will be hidden dangers. But I've found a reason to get rid of those who are easy to cause trouble. Although the remaining bandits are slippery and have dirty hands, they are easy to suppress and intimidate. Even if they gather together, they won't cause any big trouble." Lu Shi heard that and slightly tightened his hand on his left knee. Then he secretly loosened it. Originally, he thought that his daughter would not know the severity of the situation and keep a group of hidden dangers by her side. It would be terrible if she was bitten by them. Therefore, after receiving the news, he hurriedly wanted to see her and give her a reminder. However, he did not expect that this child was even more vicious and merciless than he thought. But there are exceptions to everything. The human heart is more complicated and changeable. Maybe there are times when I'm wrong. Jiang Pengji smiled faintly and said, "Xiao Yu did a good job. He separated the bandits. If that's the case, the bandits still dare to cause trouble." Speaking of this, Jiang Pengji's lips suddenly curved into a bloodthirsty smile. It's better to kill them directly. They couldn't create value, couldn't contribute to the labor force, and even dragged her down. Why not get rid of them early? Why keep them? I'm relieved that you think so. Lu Shi sighed softly. His hanging heart slowly calmed down. He was not afraid of anything. He was afraid that his child was too soft-hearted, or too proud and conceited. She could do big things well but stumble over small things. "Father, don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Lu Shi nodded and immediately looked at her with hesitation. "If that's the case, are you still going out these days?" Lu Shi was hinting at her to ask if she was still going to find trouble with the bandits. Jiang Pengji understood in an instant. "No, I'm going to digest and absorb what we've collected. It's more important to have quality than quantity. If the troops are too bloated, the overall strength will decrease instead of increase. It's not worth the loss." She planned to let the bandits undergo mandatory training for 3 to 5 days. Then she would see the results and screen them one by one. The useful ones would be kept, and the less useful ones would be sold to the broker or let them work in the fields. Anyway, she did not keep idle people here. Seeing that Lu Shi was still there, she asked, "Father, do you have any other orders?" Lu Shi lowered his eyes and asked in a low voice, "You? When did you kill Meng Liang?" Lu Shi knew that his daughter would do what she wanted to do, but he didn't expect that she would kill Meng Liang without hesitation. If he hadn't thought of Meng Liang on a whim, he would have thought that he was still alive. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "How long has Coach Meng been here?" "Meng Liang has been dead for a few days." Chapter 221. One of the only and only. "Father, you don't know about this?" Jiang Pengji thought that with Lu Shi's attention to her, nothing that happened around her could be hidden from his eyes. Lu Shi shook his head. Ever since Jiang Pengji asked Su Ku to convey her attitude, he had let his guard down. He did not expect that his daughter would send Meng Liang to the afterlife. Did she need to be so efficient? I am not omniscient and omnipotent. How can I know everything? She felt a slight pain in his forehead, but he was already dead. What happened was done, and there was no turning back. He might as well think about what to do next. You used Meng Liang's life as a favor to Meng Hun. Based on your temperament, you must have gotten more benefits than that. Did you blackmail the Mengs? Blackmail? That was not a good way to put it. It was called asking for benefits openly. Jiang Pengji revealed a little of her plan. She looked at her helplessly. Didn't I give you the list before? If you still need more, go to the accounts room and get more. She said with some forbearance. You are the only child in the family. These are all yours. Why do you have to be so calculative with me? To put it nicely, his daughter had her own abilities. To put it bluntly, she was estranged from him. That was not what she wanted. Jiang Pengji was silent for a while. If it were in the past, she would not have bothered to explain. But now, she felt that it was not a good idea to do so. Father, you misunderstood me. It's not that I am calculative with you. I just don't want to be involved with the aristocratic families. Jiang Pengji hesitated for a while. She looked at her in shock. She said, starting from scratch, it will be easy to distinguish in the future. Whether it was Su Ku, Meng Hun, or Qiguan Rang, all three of them had one thing in common: they had low social status. It wasn't that she couldn't attract people of high status. In fact, as long as she put up the banner of Liu Shi's son, she could also attract people of a certain status with Liu Shi's halo. As the son, she could also attract people of a certain status. Why didn't she do that? Because she did not want to. If she got involved too early, she would be passive in the future. Jiang Pengji's goal was very clear, so in order to achieve it, she needed to formulate a series of plans. Considering the current social climate, she decisively gave up the more convenient path of relying on her father. The benefits in the early stages were indeed great, but what about the middle and later stages? She wanted to nurture her own team and talents, not those who were only thinking about clan bloodlines. Don't be fooled by how those aristocratic families boasted about their family name and bloodline, and how they preached their loyalty. In fact, for the benefit of the clan and for their own benefit, under special circumstances, they were willing to give up their backbone, reservedness, and righteousness. Are they like a piece of poison wrapped in sugar? Medicine, at first it tasted sweet and greasy, but when the sugar coating was finished, only poison was left. It looked tempting, but it was extremely delicious. The path she was going to take would inevitably touch upon the most fatal interest of the aristocratic families: education. Why were aristocratic families called aristocratic families? This was because they had money in their hands and food in their granaries. They monopolized education and made studying a privilege for a minority of people. They also indirectly monopolized the imperial court. Talents were all from aristocratic families. 1 generation, 2 generation, 3 generation. After generations, the officials in the imperial court were more or less related by blood or marriage. When this group of people worked together, how could the emperor have a say? Did they want to attack them? They didn't mind firing the emperor first. Jiang Pengji had enough of this ignorant era. Out of 100 people she met outside, 99 of them were illiterate. In addition to education, there was also the land. Were the farmers in Dongqing not hardworking? They were very hardworking. Jiang Pengji was very clear about this. They worked before dawn and only returned home with their hoes when the sun set. They worked from dawn to dusk, and they couldn't even save a surplus of food throughout the year. If they were unfortunate enough to encounter a natural disaster, they couldn't eat a full meal throughout the year. Perhaps a large number of people would starve to death. Starving people everywhere. Was this just a word? This was a living hell on earth. But why were they so hard-working, but still unable to eat enough and wear warm clothes? Was the land too barren, or was the tax exploitation too vicious? Although Jiang Pengji was criticized by the system for not going out much, in fact, she was trying her best to understand this era from books and understand their lives through chatting with the farmers. The more she understood, the clearer Jiang Pengji was about the path she wanted to take. This path was very long, but she would try her best to plan and perfect it. Obviously, in the path she planned, the aristocratic families were not allowed to interfere in the beginning. If they were, the development in the middle and later stages would be more restrained. She wanted to promote education so that all children could study, regardless of their status. Would the aristocratic families be willing? She wanted to reform the land so that all the hard-working people could reap the benefits they deserved. Would the aristocratic families be willing? Her ideas touched the most important thing in their lives. They would use all their strength to oppose it. When the time came, would they listen to her, or would she listen to others? As a son of an aristocratic family, Jiang Pengji's ideas were simply unorthodox. She was a living freak. Why? Lu Shi held back for a long time before he asked these few words with trembling lips. Jiang Pengji asked calmly, "Father, do you think there is a difference between being the only one and being one?" She was very clear that because of her cheap mother's influence and spoilers, Lu Shi had long been mentally prepared for this reality. In terms of stirring up trouble, Lu Shi fully supported her and supported her to take that path. Therefore, she wanted to have a frank talk with the other party. The only one. Lu Shi was smart and instantly understood what she meant. What was the only one? There was only one since ancient times. What was one? One among all the living things. The meaning of Jiang Pengji's words was very clear. She wanted to step on the aristocratic families, promote education, reform the land, and enlighten the people. To the small group of people in the aristocratic families, she was indeed hateful. But to all the living things and people in the future, she might be the only one to reach this step since ancient times. Those who came later would not be able to catch up. Jiang Pengji smiled suddenly and said confidently, "If father thinks that I am disobedient and unfilial, it is still not too late." She was still young. If Lu Shi wanted to deal with her, there was nothing she could do, right? Of course, if Lu Shi wanted to keep her, he had to have the ability to do so. Lu Shi choked. The shock in his heart turned into helplessness. "You know that I won't hurt you. If not for the fact that you have a strong backing, why would you say this to me?" Because she was sure of it, she dared to talk to him frankly. "To your father, there is nothing more important than your mother, you, and your two elder brothers. Besides, even if the aristocratic families were weakened, as the future royal family, who would treat the Lu family unfairly?" Lu Shi was a smart person. Chapter 222. The words father and son had already been spoken about, and unknowingly, the relationship between the two had become closer. They didn't have to hide things from each other anymore. Lu Shi thought for a while after hearing Jiang Pengji's plan. He said, "I know Meng Zhan. He's arrogant and thinks too much of himself. If you use Meng Liang as a hostage and ask him for rice, not only will he give it to you, he might even give you more. Won't he cheat? For example, mixing real rice with fake rice to confuse people? Or setting up an ambush in the transport team?" Jiang Pengji was confused. She didn't think Meng Zhan's way of thinking could be understood by normal people. Lu Shi shook his head. 2,000 dawn of rice is a huge sum of money for the people. Even the gentry doesn't have that much money. But for a noble family like the Mengs, it's not even a drop in the bucket. The Mengs have been in Sangzhou for so many years. You can't even imagine how rich they are. Seeing Jiang Pengji was deep in thought, Lu Shi took the opportunity to say, Cangzhou has a lot of land and a lot of people. Not to mention the Mengs during the Xia dynasty, the Mengs have been in Cangzhou for decades after Dongqing was established. Every year, they stole enough money and rice to support 100,000 troops. So, Meng Zhan wouldn't care about 2,000 dawn of rice. According to Lu Shi's understanding of him, he might even, generously, add another 1,000 dawn of rice. That would be a total of 3,000 dawn. You kidnapped Meng Liang under Meng Hun's name. It's almost impossible for Meng Zhan to do anything to the rice. Maybe he'll even send you new rice. Lu Shi snorted. Meng Zhan wasn't a good person when it came to personal matters, but he was not to be underestimated when it came to official matters. Jiang Pengji understood everything after hearing Lu Shi's words. Father, you mean? Meng Zhan won't do anything to the rice. Instead, he'll send it over openly to show that he's a good man and Meng Hun is a hypocrite who doesn't care about the death of his wife and daughter for some rice? Yes. According to my understanding of him, he'll probably do that. He's good at disgusting people. The person who knew you the most could be your opponent. Lu Shi and Meng Zhan had broken off their relationship. The two families did not keep in touch with each other, and there were many conflicts in private. Lu Shi knew Meng Zhan very well. Meng Zhan was an extremely proud man. He wouldn't condescend himself to fight with a lowly person like Meng Hun. In other words, he didn't care. Jiang Pengji secretly sneered and said, if that's the case, it's really disgusting. If Meng Liang was still alive, the Mengs would have used 2,000 dawn of food to exchange for his safety. Meng Hun would have become the laughing stock of the world and his reputation would have been ruined. Unfortunately, Meng Liang was already dead. If the Mengs dared to use this method to disgust her, she would let them know what disgust was. But then again, he didn't expect the Meng family to be so rich. Their accumulation was so rich that it made people envious. If I had known that he was so rich, I would have asked for 30 to 50,000 stones. Asking for a mere 2,000 stones will only make people laugh at me in secret. Jiang Pengji added unhappily, the Mengs are so generous. I reckon they can take out tens of thousands of dawn of grain without a frown. Lu Shi almost choked on his own saliva. Was his daughter a bandit in her past life? 2,000 dawn should be enough. I'm afraid you can't afford more. Lu Shi said, don't treat the Mengs like a sucker. They won't care about such a small profit. But if they ask for too much, I'm afraid they'll really get angry. How could 2,000 dawn and 20,000 dawn be the same? In Lu Shi's opinion, a newborn calf is not afraid of a tiger. It was a perfect saying for his daughter. Who would cause trouble for the Mengs? Not only did she do it, but she also killed Meng Liang and abducted Meng Hun, who had a grudge against the Mengs. How much of a grudge? But thinking about what Amin had said, he could understand. Maybe it was fate. His daughter and the Mengs were born to be incompatible. Jiang Pengji thought about it and asked, 2,000 dawn of grain is just a small profit for the Mengs. What about other families? Lu Shi didn't understand and asked, what? She said, I wanted to use this batch of grain to temporarily suppress the rising price. Father, you should know that the incident in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture hasn't spread yet. Only a few people know about it. When the whole world knows about it, I'm afraid that Hejian County will be affected. It took less than half a month to travel from Hejian County to Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. Once the chaos in Meng County spread, the people would naturally panic and it would be normal for the grain price to rise. It will definitely be affected, but 2,000 dawn. If you want to make a profit from it, it's a good opportunity. You can easily increase the price by 3 to 5 times. After all, it's a free gift from the Mengs. But it's definitely not enough to suppress the grain price. After all, He was the chief of Hu County, and he lived in this era. His prediction was naturally more accurate than Su Ku and Jiang Pengji's. It's not enough? Jiang Pengji was slightly stunned. 1 stone was 50 kilograms, which was 100 caddies. It was enough to feed a family of 4 for 40 to 50 days. That was still considered enough to fill their stomachs. Many people lived frugally and matched their grains with other foods to last for a longer time. Hejian County wasn't big. Excluding the gentry, there were only about 20 to 30,000 people. Most of the people had leftover grain from the previous year. How could it not be enough? Lu Shi thought for a while and knew where Jiang Pengji's calculation was wrong. Most people follow blindly. To put it bluntly, they believe whatever they hear. Lu Shi explained to her in detail, the reason why I said 2,000 dong is not enough is that the rich families with extra money might buy a year's worth of grain at one time or even longer. But your calculation is based on 1 or 2 months' worth of grain per person. If you calculate carefully, 2,000 dong is indeed enough. Lu Shi sighed and said, you know that every family only needs to buy 1 or 2 months' worth of grain and hold on until the autumn harvest. Even if the civil unrest in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture is serious, it won't really affect the people, but they won't consider it. If Jiang Pengji wanted to make a fortune with 2,000 dong of grain, it would be absolutely easy. But if she wanted to suppress the grain price, not to mention 2,000 dong, even 10,000 dong would be a stretch. Jiang Pengji frowned and thought about Lu Shi's words seriously. Jiang Pengji didn't think it was embarrassing for Lu Shi to deny her plan. He knew the era better than she did. As a native, Lu Shi had more experience and knowledge about the era than she did. What if there is a purchase limit? Lu Shi was confused. Purchase limit? Jiang Pengji thought for a while and explained, a few days before the civil unrest, the people will be anxious and there will definitely be a fight. Then the grain store will sell 500 dong or 1,000 dong of grain at once to create the illusion that there is an abundance of grain and calm the people. After that, there will be a limit of 100 dong of grain per day, and the weight of each person's grain will be limited. It will be enough to buy for a month. Jiang Pengji thought about it and felt that there was nothing wrong with the idea, so she asked for Lu Shi's opinion. What do you think, father? Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 223. 2,000 dong of grain had the same effect as 20,000 dong. What else could he say? Lu Shi asked, daily purchase limit. That's not bad. But what if some people buy the grain repeatedly for several days in a row? Jiang Pengji's aim was to suppress the grain price. That meant that when the prices of other grain stores skyrocketed, she would sell the grain at the same price as usual, or at a slightly higher price than usual. The people would naturally choose to buy from her. Most of the commoners lived a frugal life. If they could be cheap, they would. They would not be extravagant. They were not going to starve to death. It was just delaying the purchase of cheaper grain for a few days. Of course, they were willing to wait. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, as long as we secretly spread the word that the grain store is working for the people's welfare. That's why we insist on only raising the price a little when the grain price of other grains skyrocketed. Under the premise of the daily purchase limit, if some people buy too much grain for several days in a row, the other people will definitely not be able to buy the grain. That way, the people will understand the grain store's painstaking efforts, and the pressure will be less. Lu Shi was stunned by what he heard. He thought that his daughter was inexperienced and didn't understand the world. That was why she came up with the idea of suppressing the grain price with 2,000 dong of grain. Looking at her now, she was indeed inexperienced, but she had a sharp mind. He only needed to point out a flaw, and she was able to correct it. Not to mention anything else, just this flexibility was enough to make him feel ashamed and admirable. If she followed her plan, the grain store would probably sell a few thousand don of grain and win the hearts of the people in Hejian County. She would earn enough money and fame at the same time. Due to the public opinion, the other grain stores would not be able to increase the price even if they wanted to. As long as they could delay until the autumn harvest, the grain price would naturally decrease, and the people would not have to worry about food shortage. But if that's the case, the profit will be less than expected. Jiang Pengji shook her head with pity. She originally wanted to sell 2,000 don of grain for 10,000 don to trick the gentry families in Hejian County. It seemed that she had to give up that tempting idea. She had too little grain in her hands. It was not enough to play such a big game. If Lu Shi knew what she was thinking, he would not be able to help but roll his eyes. Her current plan was enough to make people hate her. If she still wanted to trick the gentry families in Hejian County, she would not want to live in Hejian County. Cutting one's path to wealth was like killing one's parents. The landowning households could have used this opportunity to clear out the stockpiled grain in their granaries and earned their fill to their heart's content. Because of Jiang Pengji's interference, the market share of grain prices in Hejian County for the next month would be taken away by her. She could not be so shameless. Lu Shi did not know whether to laugh or cry, but he had more confidence in Jiang Pengji. Those who were truly capable, no matter how they started, even if they had a bad hand, would still be able to reach unimaginable heights. There was no doubt that the daughter before him was such a person. Lu Shi smiled faintly and said, "It's good that we can earn it. After all, it's a gift from the Mengs. Shihu 10 don of grain, Lu Meng. Doff of Lu 2 don of 6 Lu don of Lu, she said. As the saying goes, a pillow comes when you doze off. If the Mengs were really kind enough to send an extra 1,000 don of grain, it would be great. 2, father and 6 doff Lu 2 D2 Lu 2. Shi Lu don Wu 6 dang Wu. The father and son tacitly ignored the expressions on the faces of the Mengs when they brought the food and Meng Liang's body away. That kind of scene would definitely be very beautiful. They wanted to use their generosity to humiliate others, but reality slapped them hard in the face. Meng Han was a hypocrite? He wasn't. He had guts and brains. He cheated the Mengs of a few thousand don of grain, and he even dared to wield a butcher's knife against their baby to avenge his wife and daughter. The Mengs wanted to trample on Meng Han's dignity, but Jiang Pengji did the same. The development of the troops was very smooth. Jiang Pengji had removed the troublemakers early on. The remaining people, with the cooperation of Meng Han and Su Ku, naturally could not cause any trouble. Instead, they were assimilated into the life of the troops and gradually accepted the status quo. What was so good about being a bandit? Even the bandits themselves thought the same. The people of the world looked down on thieves like chickens and thieves like dogs. Who would want to be a bandit that was despised by others if they could eat their fill, wear their clothes, and live a decent life? Looking at the money the others received, the bandits secretly laughed at them. What could they do with such a small amount of money? It would be gone after a few meals in the tavern. How long could they keep it? But when they learned that every member of the troops was given seasonal clothes every season, food and accommodation were taken care of by the head family, and the monthly money was freely used, and there were occasional rewards. The only downside was that the training was hard, but it was much better than working in the fields. It was better than bandits like them, who had unstable businesses and lives. So they were tempted, jealous, and angry. This was because they discovered that the rewards were all taken from their stockade. Although they were bandits who robbed houses, their savings were almost zero. The real wealth was with the heads of the families. Bah! I earn my hard-earned money with a knife, but in the end, all the money goes into the pockets of the heads of the families. It's the same as working for the family. These people work for the family and get their own money, while we can only watch others. What the hell is this? It was the same as working for the family. Their work was illegal, while the others were legal. Naturally, the treatment was different. Then what do you want? Do you really want to work for this family? Several bandits secretly gathered together and discussed in low voices. Their faces were full of struggle. After a long time, the first bandit to complain said, "I'm afraid of starving. As long as I can eat my fill, save some money, marry a wife, and give birth to 2 fat boys. It doesn't matter who I work for. I can only watch those heads enjoy themselves all year round. I've risked my life and done so many things against my conscience, but I haven't even seen a sow." His position had begun to waver, and the others who were originally not firm also began to waver. "I'm also afraid of starving. The family of the head of the family is really nice. They have white steamed buns for every meal, and sometimes they even have scallion pancakes. What if we don't agree? Didn't they say they would sell us to human traffickers?" One of them said timidly. "We all know what kind of people those human traffickers are. It's better to work hard and try to be chosen by the head family." Right, what was so good about being a bandit? Chapter 224. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms and leaned against a wooden pole. She raised her eyebrows as she looked at the training scene in front of her. "I thought it would take a lot of effort to tame these bandits, or at least 10 days to half a month. I didn't expect that you could tame them in just 3 to 5 days." She smiled at Su Ku, who was standing beside her. "They are working very hard." To prevent any possible hidden dangers, Su Ku scattered all the bandits he took in and inserted them into the original troops. However, looking at them now, those who trained so hard that veins were popping out of their foreheads, and it was obvious that they had used all their strength, were actually that group of bandits. In comparison, the original troops were also working very hard, but it was easy to see the difference between them. That surprised Jiang Pengji. Except for a few evil people, most of them are ordinary people. They just want food and a peaceful family. If they had other choices, they wouldn't have taken the risk to become bandits. I only showed them the benefits of being part of the troops. I didn't need to do much else to make them want to stay. In order to stay, they will try their best to show off their abilities. To put it bluntly, whoever gave them milk was their mother. They were willing to follow and work for whoever could give them a good life. Su Ku didn't need to say much. He only needed to let the original troops reveal a little about their current treatment. When it came to these bandits, no amount of flowery words could compare to the benefits they could get. Jiang Pengji calculated the time in her mind and said, "In a few days, the food from Meng County will be delivered here. We should also prepare in advance. Let's first arrange people to guard the border of Hejian County and Meng County. Let's find out the details of the food team." Su Ku heard her mention this and frowned worriedly. He asked, "If they deliver the food, how will we take it? The Lus can't get involved in this matter to avoid being suspected by the Mengs. But if we let Coach Meng lead the people there in person, I'm afraid that the food team might be deceptive and suddenly attack. If that's the case, won't it put Coach Meng in danger?" Jiang Pengji laughed and said, "When did I say that I would personally send people to take the food away?" In fact, Jiang Pengji had no intention of showing her face. The more flaws she revealed, the easier it would be for others to use against her. "So, Lang Jun, what do you mean?" Su Ku's eyes flashed as if he had thought of something. "Bamboo pieces." At some point, she was holding a slender piece of bamboo between her fingers. It seemed to have been removed from an old bamboo slip. "We only need to write down what we need to do at each step and let them carry it out themselves. First, order them to put the food in the designated place, then use the bamboo pieces to lure them to another place, lure the tiger away from the mountain, and then move the food away." Su Ming looked hesitant. But, 2,000 dawn of food isn't a small amount. Even if we send everyone in the army, we might not be able to move all the food in a short period of time. If the Meng family returns to the future and catches us unprepared, what should we do? Jiang Pengji smiled and said mysteriously, I have my own plan. Just wait and see. Su Ku, he suddenly felt an indescribable pain in the ass. It seemed like he was the brains of the other party, right? It felt like the roles were completely reversed. A few days later, the weather was getting warmer and warmer. Most people had already put on light spring clothes. The good-looking Langjuns wore flower hairpins and powder, long robes with wide sleeves. When they stood in the wind, they looked like they had ascended to immortality. Jiang Pengji couldn't stand the trend. She still wore no makeup and her clothes were plain and clean. At first glance, she seemed to come from an ordinary family, but if one looked closely at the material of her clothes, one would know that her family wasn't simple. Jiang Pengji sat in a tea-house at the closest station to Hejian County. She asked the owner of the tea-house to bring her a big pot of tea. Lanting, the taste of this tea. It must be hard for you to eat it. Qiguan Rang glanced at the clay bowl she was holding and gulped down the tea. He looked at the shabby surroundings and shook his head. Jiang Pengji secretly rolled her eyes. Nothing will happen to me if I drink it. Why can't I drink it? Compared to the delicate tea she usually drank, the big pot of tea was rough and simple. There was a slightly astringent taste in her mouth. But the tea-house next to the station was for travelers to quench their thirst. You could drink it for 1 coin, so you could not expect the taste to be good. Qiguan Rang looked at Jiang Pengji's image again and again. He found it funny. At that moment, even if the person in front of him took the initiative to say that she was the Langjun of the Lu family in Hu County, no one would believe her. Jiang Pengji was not dressed in her usual refined attire. She was dressed in a dark, coarse brown robe with 2 patches on her shoulders. Her long hair was tied up high, and the hair tie was made from rice stalks. Her skin was a little darker than usual, except for her delicate face and bright eyes. She looked like a farmer's boy. If she had not come to find him in the Lu family's carriage, Qiguan Rang would not have recognized her. It's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. But it doesn't seem to make a difference to you. Jiang Pengji smiled and raised her eyebrows at him. She said, Am I that delicate? Qiguan Rang coughed. Jiang Pengji said she was not a delicate person, but she said he was. He decisively changed the topic. He covered his eyes with one hand and looked into the distance. You said you wanted me to watch a good show. Where is it? As soon as he finished speaking, there seemed to be smoke rising in the distance. Qiguan Rang's nerves tightened. He instantly understood Jiang Pengji's intention. That sucker really sent something over? Since there were others in the tea-house, Qiguan Rang did not say it too clearly. He used a term that both of them could understand. Jiang Pengji looked in the direction Qiguan Rang was looking at. She smiled. Do you dare to bet with me on whether this is a big fish or a small one? Qiguan Rang asked her, what is a big fish and what is a small fish? More than 2,000 is a big fish, and less than 2,000 is a small fish. How about that? Qiguan Rang hurriedly waved the feather fan in his hand and said, I won't bet with you. I will definitely lose. Jiang Pengji had dragged him over to watch the show. She must have known the details of the grain team. If he were to bet with her on the amount of grain in the team, wouldn't he be asking for trouble? Whether it was big or small, the person in front of him would not lose. What was the point of betting? Boring. Chapter 225. The grain team transporting the grain was very large, and there were more than 200 soldiers dressed as military officers on both sides of the team. Each of the soldiers was holding a gleaming spear in their hands. Even if someone coveted this batch of grain and wanted to take advantage of the situation, they would have to think twice before doing so. The laborers were sweating from head to toe. Their faces were red, and their clothes were drenched in sweat. They were overjoyed when they saw a tea house next to the station. "Sir, we've been transporting the grain for so long. We're all tired. Why don't we rest for a while before we continue?" The leader of the laborers approached them with a smile and talked to the leader of the soldiers who were guarding the grain. They were all made of flesh and blood, not made of steel. After transporting so much food from Meng County to here, the cooks were physically and mentally exhausted. However, the soldiers on horseback were blind and could not see. Anyone who was slow would be whipped. Luckily, Hejin County was right in front of them. It would only take them half a day to get there. Otherwise, someone would die of exhaustion if they continued like this. The leader of the soldiers was the one who had been spared by Jiang Pengji on purpose. He was eager to make up for his mistake by performing meritorious deeds. After receiving the task of escorting the grain, he had been constantly squeezing the laborers' energy and urging them to travel day and night, hoping to rescue Meng Liang as soon as possible. As the days passed, he felt more and more uneasy. He kept feeling that something bad might happen if he delayed any longer. Coupled with his eagerness to perform meritorious deeds, he naturally did not notice the fatigue on the laborers' faces. Even if he did, he wouldn't care. They were just a few laborers. How could they compare to the second Langjun of the Mengs? If something happened to Meng Liang because they were too slow, who would take the blame? However, now that they were only half a day away from Hejin County, the anxiety in his heart had eased a lot. In addition, he also felt a little tired, so he simply followed the leader's words and waved his hand to let the whole team rest for an hour. After receiving permission, the cook leader felt as if he had been pardoned. He hurriedly shouted to the cook at the back of the team. "Hurry up. The tea house is right in front. Let's go there to rest and have a cup of tea." When everyone heard this, they were instantly motivated. The long grain team was like a wriggling worm, slowly approaching the tea house. This tea house often received caravans traveling from the south to the north, so it had seen big scenes before. The lady boss hurriedly put on a smile and greeted a few soldiers who had entered the tea house. The rest of the soldiers found a random place to sit outside. Jiang Pengji saw that the proprietress was running around in circles. Qiguan Rang looked as if he had seen a ghost. Jiang Pengji stood up with a kind and honest smile on her face. "Lady boss, why don't I help you?" "Hey, I was in too much of a hurry and forgot to bring my copper coins." The lady boss looked at her from head to toe and smiled warmly. "It just so happens that we're very busy here. Go and serve a few bowls of tea to the soldiers outside. Do it well. If you're clumsy, you'll have to pay double the compensation." Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "Don't worry about that. I work in the fields every day at home. My hands and feet are nimble." If it had been someone slightly more mean, they would have probably punished her. Why did she come here when she could not even afford a copper coin's worth of tea? However, Jiang Pengji could tell that although the proprietress had a mean face, she had a sharp tongue and a soft heart. She was very warm and considerate. Sometimes, when travelers did not have money to pay for tea, she would generously waive it. When it was cold, she would even make ginger soup to ward off the cold. Qiguan Rang was stunned. He watched Jiang Pengji walk out of the tea house with a big bowl of tea. She easily blended into the grain team and secretly observed the goods in the cart under the pretext of serving tea. Her face was filled with a warm smile. It was as if she had changed into a different person. Was this the same Lu Shi, the son of the Lu County chief that he knew? Would anyone believe that he was a wild boy from a peasant family? Qiguan Rang was greatly impressed. On the other side, Jiang Pengji had gained a lot. Using the opportunity of serving big bowls of tea, she seemed to be complaining and chatting, but she slowly got important information from the cooks. Of course, the cooks who leaked the information didn't realize it. After all, they were accompanied by the soldiers who escorted the grain. "Hey, you're just a wild boy. Why are you so curious?" A soldier raised his head and gulped down a bowl of tea. He still felt thirsty and asked Jiang Pengji to bring him another bowl. "Bring me another bowl. I'm dying of thirst," another soldier smiled and said. He hasn't seen much of the world. It's not a big deal for him to ask a few questions out of curiosity. Anyway, he did not ask any important questions, so he could answer them. Jiang Pengji readily agreed. 2 bowls of tea. Please wait for a moment. Qiguan Rang looked at Jiang Pengji's nimble figure as she busied herself everywhere. If he didn't know that she had an ulterior motive, he might have misunderstood. However, for a noble son of an aristocratic family to go this far in order to obtain information, he had to give it his all. He laughed involuntarily. After an hour, Jiang Pengji, who had not stopped for a moment, finally had the chance to sit down. The grain team had set off again. "You really? Why do you have to do this?" Qiguan Rang did not know whether to laugh or cry. "If I didn't do this, it would be hard to get close to them." Jiang Pengji had been busy for a long time, so her mouth was dry. After drinking a bowl of tea, she felt refreshed. She whispered to Qiguan Rang, "There's no problem with the grain team. It's not 2,000 dong, it's more than 3,000 dong. The Mengs are really generous. I just don't know if they'll still be smiling in 2 days." Qiguan Rang raised his eyebrows and said in surprise, "I only saw you bustling about and trying to get information from people. You didn't even get close to the grain wagons that were being guarded by the soldiers. How did you know that there was no problem with the grain? You even knew the specific amount," Jiang Pengji said. "That's easy. Look at the weight of the wheels. The weight of the same bag of grains and sand is different. I also went to get some information from those cooks, and I can roughly estimate the total amount of food they have." Although Jiang Pengji was busy, she was actually multitasking. She added in a low voice, "Of course, I took the opportunity to get close to the grain team not to look at the grain." Qiguan Rang was suspicious. The main purpose of getting close to the grain team was not to look at the grain? Then what was it for? He frowned slightly and began to recall Jiang Pengji's actions during this period of time, hoping to guess her real intention. "Don't keep thinking about it. I'm here to deliver something. If I don't take this opportunity to deliver it, it will be inconvenient to take action at other times, and it will easily arouse suspicion." Jiang Pengji smiled as she drank her tea. Her satisfied look was very much like a fox whose scheme had succeeded. Chapter 226. The food team set off again after a short rest in the tea house. Hejin County was not far away. They just needed to hold on for another half a day and they would be able to get rid of the heavy task. Many cooks had the same thought, as if their limbs were full of energy again. Finally, they arrived at the gate of Hejin County before sunset. Because of the long queue, the head of the entourage couldn't rush in like before. He had to be patient and wait for his turn. Just then, a clever-looking cook trotted to him and asked, "Sir, will we be done as long as we deliver the food into the city?" The head of the entourage rolled his eyes and said angrily, "Who told you that? Just wait for the order. Don't mind what you don't have to do." If the cook asked him, who would he ask? The food team was huge and attracted a lot of attention along the way. Meng Han should have known that they were coming. However, he still didn't know what the thief wanted to do. Where, when, and how he would take over the food. The only thing he could do now was to wait patiently for the thief to send his men and hand over the food. As he was thinking, it was almost his turn. The head of the entourage couldn't help but frown as he looked at the towering city gate. Since the guards at the city gate were rotational and the guards on duty today were not the same as the previous ones, they didn't recognize the head of the entourage as the culprit of the murder at the city gate. They only saw the food team, so they couldn't help but feel suspicious. A guard walked up and asked, "Where did you come from? What's in the cart?" He looked at the cooks and the soldiers who were escorting the food with his beady eyes. He was thinking about how to get something out of them. They had done this kind of thing many times. They secretly took advantage of the commoners entering and exiting the city gates and asked them to pay some money to show their filial piety. The commoners did not fight with the officials. Even if the guards of the city gates were not considered officials, most of the commoners would still grit their teeth and be taken advantage of. As long as they didn't make a big deal out of it, the officials would turn a blind eye to it. That was why being a guard at the city gate was a lucrative job. After saying that, the guard swaggered up and was about to search the food in the cart. He even pushed away a cook who was in his way. The cook didn't dare to say anything. He just stared at the head of the entourage. "It feels pretty solid. Can't you have someone in charge tell us what's in the car?" The guard raised his hand and pressed on the sack of grain. Just by feeling it, he could more or less guess what was inside. But he wanted to stir up trouble. Since the manager of the grain team took the initiative to give him money, he couldn't just let it go. So, he pretended to pull out the knife from his waist and stab the grain bag. "I think there's something wrong with the things in the cart. Let's open them and check." However, he had only pulled out half of his saber when a black whip descended from the sky and lashed at his arm, drawing out dripping blood. What a blind dog! The head of the entourage put away his whip coldly and watched the guard rolling on the ground in pain. The rest of the civilians noticed the commotion. They were all terrified, fearing that they would be hurt by the head of the entourage's whip. "How dare you lowly dogs touch the grain escorted by the Mengs?" With a sneer, the head of the entourage shouted, "Go!" The horse obediently moved forward and was about to enter the city. At that moment, the cook in charge of the cart saw something. He was confused and pulled out the thing under the grain bag. This thing, wasn't there before? As soon as he unfolded it, he saw a black human head drawn on it. The cook was startled and screamed, which alerted the head of the entourage. He frowned impatiently and scolded, "What are you screaming for?" The cook hurriedly knelt down regardless of the stones on the ground. His hands trembled as he held the rough cloth. "Sir, I didn't mean to disturb you. It's just that, this damn thing," the thing in the cook's hands caught the head of the entourage's attention. He rode forward and grabbed the rough cloth from the cook's hands. He unfolded it and his face darkened immediately. How could he not see it when the cook couldn't? The human head drawn on the rough cloth belonged to the second Langjun of the Mengs, Meng Liang. Even though the charcoal was rough, it retained the most distinctive features of the human head. It was easy to tell who the person was at first glance. The head of the entourage clenched his fists and yelled, "Tell me, where did you get this?" The guard whose arm was broken was still rolling on the ground in pain. The cook didn't dare to hide anything and told the truth. "General, this thing was found under the grain sacks. Before, there was no such thing." The cook broke into a cold sweat and felt uneasy as he thought of the human head drawn on the rough cloth. "Grain bag?" the head of the entourage murmured. He jumped off the horse and waved his hand to push away the cooks who were blocking his way. He walked straight to the cart and examined it carefully. To his surprise, he also found a piece of coarse cloth of the same texture. There were no human heads painted on it, but strange patterns. All of a sudden, the head of the entourage felt a chill in his heart. He yelled, "Everyone, check the cart and see if there's anything suspicious." While he was feeling uneasy, the guards on duty did not let him go. They all stepped forward and tried to pull out their swords. Where did you come from? How dare you hurt people in public? The head of the entourage sneered and said, I not only hurt people, but I also have the guts to kill people. I'll kill you if you come any closer. As soon as he finished speaking, the soldiers who were responsible for escorting the grain rushed forward and pointed their spears at the guards. The two sides were in a stalemate. However, there were only 20 to 30 guards at the gate, while there were more than 200 soldiers escorting the grain. At the moment, they found 1 to 3 pieces of rough cloth in different sizes on each cart. It was obvious that they were torn randomly. Most of the rough cloth had strange patterns on them, and some of them were rough and ugly characters. The head of the entourage put the rough cloth together with a cold face. It turned out to be a picture. There were some small characters next to the picture. The head of the entourage read it carefully. His face turned purple after reading it. The delivery is so slow. If you want Meng Liang to live, send the grain here as soon as possible. We won't wait for you. Meng Han, the traitor of the Mengs. This was so arrogant. The head of the entourage wanted to tear all the rough cloth, but he couldn't do that. Meng Han's words were very clear. They needed the grain badly and they were running out of patience. If they delayed any longer, Meng Liang's life would be in danger. Chapter 227. He forced himself to calm down and asked his subordinate to find an experienced hunter who was familiar with the mountains near Hejian to lead the way. As for entering the city? No way. The location on the map was outside the city, not inside. It would be a waste of time to enter the city. But before that, he had to figure out one thing. When did Meng Han's men put the cloth on the wagons? Not only was he confused, but the cooks who were responsible for transporting the grain were also confused. To ensure that the amount of grain was correct, they would check the wagons carefully every time they went to a place for repairs. Therefore, it was almost certain that before the last repair, the grain cart did not have these strange coarse cloth on it. The head of the entourage also knew that, so he didn't waste any more time on it. Instead, he looked at all the cooks suspiciously. He asked, "Do any of you remember anyone who got close to the wagons?" That was a tough question. The cooks couldn't help but put on a bitter face. There were too many people who could get close to the wagons. Who could remember? However, one of the cooks was smart enough to ask, "Sir, could it be when we were at the tea house?" The tea house was a place with a lot of people. An ordinary-looking person wouldn't raise any suspicion. But that was quickly denied. Another cook said, "You can't accuse someone wrongly. Everyone was beside the wagons during the repair. How could there be anyone suspicious?" These things, obviously, appeared out of nowhere. People in that era were afraid of ghosts and gods. They often liked to explain things that they didn't know. The head of the entourage was annoyed. He scolded, "Nonsense. How can you believe in ghosts and gods? Think about it carefully. Who could it be? If no one touched the wagons and left these things behind, then the only reason was that there was a mole in the team." The head of the entourage had basically given his verdict after he came to this reliable conclusion. The cooks all shook their heads. Some of them suspected that it was Jiang Pengji who brought the tea, but it was not a reliable guess. Apart from Jiang Pengji, the owner of the tea house and the waiter also brought tea. Compared to the latter two, the former didn't get close to the wagons. How could they stuff the cloth into the wagons? The cooks looked at each other and became nervous. They were afraid that the head of the entourage would suspect that they were spies. The head of the entourage glanced at everyone, trying to find the mole among them. In the end, everyone looked like a mole, but no one looked like a mole. He had no choice but to put this detail aside for the time being and prepare to transport the food to the destination. It was easy to find an experienced hunter who was familiar with the terrain. After promising a large sum of money, the hunter agreed to lead the way. However, this made things difficult for the laborers who transported the grain. The mountain road was steep and not suitable for the grain carts to travel. Therefore, they could only give up on the grain cart and choose to carry the grain bags on their shoulders to carry the grain up the mountain. However, this mysterious joke seemed to have just begun. Someone found a bamboo slip at the place where the map was drawn. On it was written, "How obedient, but your speed is disappointing. I can't wait any longer. Sending the food to this place is a punishment for your inefficiency." Meng Han, the traitor of the Meng family. The head of the entourage's face turned as dark as the bottom of a pot when he saw the bamboo slip and the coarse cloth under it. At this time, a soldier asked him, "Boss, what should we do now?" The head of the entourage was breathing heavily. Although he was not carrying the grain, the mountain road was steep and he was wearing heavy armor. Naturally, he was sweating and breathing heavily. "What else can we do?" "Just do as the higher-ups say." Meng Liang was still in Meng Hun's hands. If they dared not do as he said and angered Meng Hun, he might kill Meng Liang. By then, they would be the ones crying. For the sake of Meng Liang's life, they had to obey. Fortunately, the destination marked on the second map was not far from here. The old hunter told them that they could get there in about 15 minutes. "Ah. You're fast this time. But I've already left. It's interesting to see you delivering the grain. But I haven't had enough. I want to see Meng Liang. Deliver the grain here." By Meng Han, the traitor of the Mengs. At this time, the head of the entourage was so angry that he punched the tree trunk next to him, making a dull thud. The old hunter looked at the map and said in fear, "Sir, we can't go to this place." "Why not?" the head of the entourage asked with a cold face. The old hunter's hands were trembling. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He had thought it would be a good job to lead the way, but now it seemed that it was not going to be easy. "Sir, this place is a bandit's hideout. I've seen it from afar when I was hunting before. The people living there are beasts who kill without batting an eye. If we go there..." The old hunter stammered out the reason. The head of the entourage sneered and said, "Just lead the way. Cut the crap. It was just a bandit stockade. He had so many men. Couldn't he handle it?" However, there was one thing he did not understand. Why did Meng Hun want to deliver the grain to the bandit stockade? Was there an ambush? Thinking of this, the head of the entourage felt uneasy. He sent a smart soldier to check it out. The soldier came back soon and said, "There's no one in the bandit stockade." "No one?" The head of the entourage was confused, but he had to force himself to do it. "But I found this at the gate of the stockade." The soldier respectfully presented a bamboo slip and a piece of coarse cloth to the head of the entourage. The head of the entourage was already uneasy when he saw it. He was afraid that it was another trick. He opened it and saw that it was Meng Hun's message again. "The grain is in the yard of the bandit stockade. That bastard Meng Liang is at the place marked on the map. Don't try to play any tricks. Otherwise, that bastard's life will be in danger." By Meng Han, the traitor of the Mengs. The head of the entourage calmed down. He sneered and said, "Coward. Coward." Meng Han wouldn't have put on such a show if he was not afraid of the Meng's authority. He was afraid that he would be surrounded and killed by his soldiers when they were handing over the grain. "What a coward." The head of the entourage sneered and raised his hand. "You bring the grain here. The rest of you, come with me to save the second Langjun." Since Meng Hun was so cowardly, it was obvious that he did not have much confidence. If he could take advantage of the situation and kill them while they were unprepared, he could bring Meng Hun's head back to report. That would be a great merit. They didn't intend to kill Meng Hun, but he was digging his own grave. Even a clay figurine would get angry. Yes, sir. Chapter 228. Qiguan Reng fluttered his feather fan and said to Jiang Pengji, "You're too evil. If that's the case, you've misunderstood me. When have I ever been bad? Who can testify?" Jiang Pengji looked innocent. Even though Qiguan Reng was experienced and knowledgeable, he was choked by Jiang Pengji's shamelessness. Testify? He was the witness, okay? The viewers in the live stream were both heartbroken and laughing. They could no longer hold back the power in their bodies. Shameless Tianxia Wudi, ha ha ha, I can testify. Please look at my ID. Serene Butterfly shatters dreams. To tell you the truth, the host is already invincible. Therefore, it was clear at a glance whether she was a good person or not. Gigi Kongting, if I transmigrated to the host's world and became her enemy, I don't think I could survive 3 episodes. It wasn't that their rank wasn't high enough, but that their opponent's rank was too high. From the beginning to the end, not only did he have something on them, he even made them run around in circles. He was simply too evil. From the perspective of the live stream, the audience could not see the expression of the unlucky guy who had been fooled by the streamer. They could only listen to the conversation between her and Qiguan Reng, trying to figure out what was happening outside. When they put themselves in that situation, many of the audience suddenly felt that the unlucky guy was about to be played to death. In Yuejia Zhuge Qinma, pft. 3 episodes? The brother above is very confident. I feel like I can only live for 1 episode. Billy, previous post, only 1 episode? Are you worthy of your ID? Sans Hisong Shuningsher, why do you guys have to torture yourselves to stand opposite the host? If I transmigrated, would definitely hug the host's thigh tightly and let her bring me along to show off and fly. From then on, I would get a promotion and a raise in salary. I would get promoted and get rich. I would marry a tall, rich, and handsome man and walk towards the pinnacle of my life. Jiang Pengji looked at the densely packed discussions on the bullet screen. Her eyes flickered and she smiled. Qiguan Reng was keenly aware of her emotions. He waved the feather fan in his hand even more vigorously. Do you still need to prove it? Lanting, you are really. I feel sorry for Xiaoyu. Qiguan Reng raised his eyebrows and stared at her. In the end, he was speechless. She really didn't know how Su Ku could endure his bad temper. He was truly shameless to such an extent. His actions were deviant and even somewhat hooligan. Even Qiguan Reng, who liked to use tricks, could not help but admire Jiang Pengji. She was much more evil than he was. The grain team itself was already exhausted. They had to carry the grain up the mountain and run all over the place. They could even lose half of their lives. The soldiers who were escorting the grain were not that tired and could still fight. However, after going through this torment, the elite soldiers had also become exhausted. When the leader of the troops escorting the rations turned around and attacked, even though he had 200 elite soldiers and more than 400 laborers transporting the rations, which was 6 times more than Jiang Pengji's troops, Qiguan Reng did not have the slightest doubt as to who would remain standing with a smile until the end. Other than Lu Lanting, who else could it be? Jiang Pengji did not continue the topic. Instead, she looked at the fan in his hand that was making a squeaking sound. Are you hot? Qiguan Reng was confused by her sudden question. A little. The cellar is a little stuffy, but we'll be able to get out after a while. The cellar they were currently in was the one where the women and children had been kept. Jiang Pengji had sent people to clean it up early in the morning and dig around it. The cellar was 3 to 4 times bigger than the previous one. Although the bandits in the village were not very good, they were good at hiding things. The cellar was well hidden. If someone had not been lucky enough to find the entrance, no one would have known that there was such a big cellar under the village. Jiang Pengji had kept the cellar for a while. Qiguan Rang's hand that was waving the fan paused. Could he say that part of the reason why he was so hot was because of the surrounding temperature and also because he was angry? Suddenly, Jiang Pengji's eyes narrowed and she whispered, "Get ready. Someone's coming." As soon as she finished speaking, the door above the cellar opened. The scout who had been sent out to gather information came back. "Lang Jun, they're here." The scene made Qiguan Rang cast a sidelong glance at her. He could not help but wonder how good her hearing was to be able to detect the enemy's movement from so far away. "Get ready. Follow the plan. You two stay here and protect Wenjing. If anything happens to him, you'll have to pay for it yourself." Jiang Pengji raised her hand and dropped it. Two tall and strong men stepped out of the ranks and walked behind Qiguan Rang. They looked like they were guarding the door. The rest of the troops who had been hiding in the cellar climbed out of the cellar stairs in an orderly manner. Each of them carried a delicate crossbow on their back. The crossbow was different from the improved one Jiang Pengji had used before. It was only half the size of the improved one and had a shooting range of about 90 paces. It could fire 3 arrows at the same time and had a low recoil. It could be tied to one's arm and was very suitable for close-range ambushes. After Jiang Pengji conquered the bandit village, the place was not abandoned. Instead, it was carefully cleaned. There were more than 100 troops in the troops. It was not a big number, so the farm was not crowded. However, after she conquered a few more bandit villages and further expanded the troops, the farm would not be enough. She planned to make use of the waste and arrange some troops to stay in the original bandit village. On the one hand, it could relieve the pressure of the training ground, and on the other hand, it could observe the movements of other bandit villages. All the troops hid in various places in an orderly manner. They were all dressed in black coarse linen clothes and their figures blended in with the night. With the dim moonlight, it was difficult to find them even if they were very close. Jiang Pengji was very strict with discipline. The troops had to obey her orders. Whoever dared to disobey would be severely punished. In addition to the basic training, Meng Han, under Jiang Pengji's instructions, had to brainlessly instill the concept of obeying orders in them. Now it was beginning to work. Even the bandits who had been recruited some time ago obeyed her orders and stood guard everywhere. Jiang Pengji raised her 5 senses and listened to the footsteps. She curled her lips. These people are stupid enough to choose to split up. The head of the entourage led 150 elite soldiers to rescue Meng Liang, while the rest of the soldiers and cooks stayed behind to transport the food. Wenjing could not help but frown. If this is really Coach Meng's idea, we will have a headache. No matter which group it is, Coach Meng's men will not be able to deal with them, Qiguan Rang said. Qiguan Rang said, Lanting's actions not only annoyed them, but also revealed her lack of confidence. The head of the food escorts will naturally be angry and want to kill. One group will go to rescue Meng Liang, and the other will ambush Coach Meng. Normally, this is not wrong. With Meng Han's manpower, how could he steal the food from the hands of 400 laborers and 50 elite soldiers? Even if he set up an ambush, the odds of success were slim. Once the head of the food escorts felt that it was a trap, he could turn around and attack Meng Han from 2 sides. He could easily kill him. Chapter 229. You said it's normal. Jiang Pengji smiled, revealing her white teeth. She tilted her head and said, I've never been normal. Jiang Pengji could not only take down the cooks and the elite soldiers in the shortest time possible, but she could also move all the rations. When the leader came back, he would probably face a second round of ambush. It was all about efficiency. How could a weakling want to play dirty with her? In her territory, she could only do things at her own pace. Qiguan Rang waved his feather fan. Jiang Pengji suddenly asked him, Wenjing, when is the best time to strike? Of course we have to wait for them to finish moving the rations and then extinguish the torches as a signal. That's the best time to strike. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if that's the case, we'll listen to Wenjing and extinguish the torches as a signal. If that's the case, Lang Jun will have to wait. It would take a long time for a few thousand dawn of rations to be piled up. Compared to the process, I value the result more. Facing enemies that outnumbered them, Jiang Pengji did not act rashly. Instead, she chose to face them calmly. She was indeed conceited, but it did not mean that she was brainless or impatient. On the contrary, she was like the most experienced hunter. In order to capture her prey, she could wait patiently. The viewers in the live stream were also watching quietly. Even though there was only the scene of the cooks moving the rations, the heavy and suffocating feeling of an approaching storm could be vaguely felt even through the screen and in another dimension. They could not help but feel nervous. At that moment, a viewer in the streaming room sent a bullet screen asking her, "In Yuejia Zhuge Qinma, does the streamer plan to recruit these people? Give me a definite answer so I can be mentally prepared." What mentally prepared? The viewers in the streaming room all knew that Jiang Pengji, the streamer, killed people without hesitation. It was not fake like in dramas where she spat blood or smeared ketchup. It was real. Blood splattered, brains splattered, and heads flew into the sky. The scene was so real that it was frightening. Some of the viewers who could not accept it would vomit after watching it. They would be traumatized by the streaming room from then on. Of course, many viewers who liked thrills would try their best to squeeze in. How could ordinary people in peacetime watch a scene of murder? Jiang Pengji's sharp eyes saw the bullet screen. She thought for a while and sent a message. Host V, kill. Alright, a lot of the audience could prepare to cover their eyes. Sir, what should we do now? After moving the food, the head cook secretly wiped his sweat and asked the soldier who was temporarily in charge of the elite troops while panting heavily. The soldier held a torch in his hand. He looked around but didn't find anything unusual. Everyone, pretend to retreat. Extinguish the torches along the way, then quietly hide in the houses and prepare for an ambush. The brightness of the torch was limited, and visibility was low at night. Everything outside of the light was still pitch black. They held the torches but didn't find any ambush, so it was obvious that the enemy should be observing them from a distance. As long as they pretended to retreat, put out the torches quickly, and quietly returned to the room of the bandit stockade to ambush, they would definitely be able to catch Meng Hun unprepared. Dreams were plentiful, but reality was harsh. When everyone obeyed the order and the torches were extinguished one by one, the viewers in the live streaming channel had wisely chosen to close their eyes. Buzz buzz buzz, the thin and dense sound of the bowstring was heard, and the arrows broke through the air. A chill suddenly rose in the soldier's heart. Just as he was wondering where this ominous feeling came from, miserable screams came from all around him. His heart suddenly sank. Just as he was about to shout out the word "enemy attack," he suddenly felt a sharp pain as if his flesh was being dug into his arm. He subconsciously raised his other hand to touch it, and it turned out to be a slender arrow that pierced through his arm. They were ambushed. But hadn't they searched the surroundings before and found no trace of the enemy? At this moment, all kinds of thoughts filled his mind, but Jiang Pengji obviously didn't give him a chance to think more. Puff, puff, the first round of volleys had just passed 2 breaths, and the second round came quickly. The sound of arrows piercing into flesh rang in the silent night, making people's hair stand on end. The troops in the dark couldn't see the enemy's position, and they didn't need to aim specifically. They just needed to shoot randomly at the place where the torches were extinguished. It was normal to be shot to death by random arrows, and those who were still alive were the lucky ones. As for those who were unharmed, they would also go up and finish them off later. Jiang Pengji's plan was very clear. She would only leave 2 or 3 injured soldiers behind and let them bring Meng Liang's body back to Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. But these people thought they were smart and chose to split up, which gave Jiang Pengji an excellent opportunity to attack. She also participated in the ambush, and the crossbow in her hand was steady and fast. The audience in the streaming room could use the convenience of the camera to see how she shot the enemy's head with one arrow. Every arrow accurately pierced through the target's eyebrows and brain, killing them in one shot. After 10 rounds of volleys, the screams were completely extinguished. Jiang Pengji said coldly, "Those who are still breathing, send them on their way." It wasn't the first time that the troops had killed people, but their limbs were still a little weak. Even those who used to be bandits couldn't kill hundreds of people so easily. It was as if they weren't harvesting human lives, but wheat after wheat. But they were all people who lived with swords and blood, so they didn't dare to hesitate and retreat. They all popped out from their hiding places. Some of them looked for those who were still breathing, while others moved quickly to carry the grain to the cellar. The cellar wasn't far, so they could move all the grain in a very short time. Nongqin belonged to the former group. Her hands were covered in sticky blood, but she was still calmly breaking the enemy's neck one after another. She looked like a Rakshasa ghost, which sent chills down everyone's spine. The bandits even wanted to take a detour. In less than a quarter of an hour, all the grain had been moved. Jiang Pengji coldly twitched the corner of her mouth. "Nongqin, bring me a pen." She casually dipped the tip of the pen into the blood on the ground and wrote rough, blood-red words on a roll of coarse cloth. "Those who go back on their words are the dogs of the Mengs. The Mengs want to use me as a scapegoat to humiliate my wife and daughter. They will be shamed even after death. Such despicable behavior is not worthy of the late Lord Meng. If you want to do this, don't blame me for retaliating. If Meng Liang doesn't die, how can I face the spirits of my deceased wife and daughter in heaven? By Meng Han, the traitor of the Mengs." After she finished writing, she threw the pen away. A piece of coarse cloth fell to the ground and covered Meng Liang's face. Meng Liang's body, which had been suppressed in the ice cellar, was now wrapped in a rag and tossed among the other corpses. Although he was dead, Jiang Pengji could still make him shine again and bring out the last of his value. "Let's go. We'll stop them again. Let's show them who's the real loser." Meng Han didn't say a word. He secretly clenched his teeth, as if he was holding back something. Finally, his eyes turned red and he vented all the anger in his heart. Qiguan Rang saw this and gently waved his feather fan. Chapter 230. Bang! He punched the tree trunk with one hand and held 2 pieces of cloth in the other. The head of the entourage was so angry that his liver was about to explode. "Meng Han, you've gone too far." He clenched his teeth in anger. He thought he could catch Meng Han, but Meng Han was still toying with him. Meng Han only gave them directions to walk around in circles. It was like a monkey's show. "If I catch you, I'll tear you to pieces." The old hunter who was leading the way was trembling in fear. His back was covered in sweat and he shivered in the cold night wind. "Sir, are we still going?" the old hunter asked carefully after the man had finished punching the tree. "No. Let's go back. They're trying to lure us away. They want to take the rations away while I'm not here. Hee, I'm afraid they'll never know that I left someone to guard the rations. Meng Han is just a stray dog. How can he swallow so much? He must be scared of choking to death." His eyes darkened and a murderous look flashed in his eyes. He didn't even need to think to know that if he kept searching, he would only find more pieces of cloth. It was an obvious trick to lure them away. The purpose was to buy time so that they could take the rations away. "Let's go back and surround Meng Han." At the order of the head of the entourage, the exhausted soldiers pulled themselves together and hurried on with their sore legs. The old hunter was confused. He was only hired to lead the way. How would he know what was going on with the soldiers? He just needed to lead the way. When he got the promised money, he would never do such a thankless job again. The old hunter muttered to himself as he moved through the forest. He was as strong as a young man in his 20s. As a veteran hunter who had been hunting nearby for more than 30 years, he could move freely even with his eyes closed. He knew when to step and where to step. He knew it would be easier for him to do so. But it was not so easy for the soldiers. The route Jiang Pengji chose seemed to be smooth and without any traps, but it was full of hidden traps. It was very exhausting. The old hunter was already used to it, so naturally he did not feel anything. On the other hand, the soldiers were traveling at night, and the terrain was so rough. How could they not be exhausted? The head of the entourage was eager to kill Meng Hun to avenge himself, so he kept urging them to hurry up. One of the soldiers panted and jogged, "Boss, don't worry. Meng Hun definitely won't expect us to come back." That's right. With so much food, even if 400 people carried it, it would still take at least an hour. How could they move fast if they were carrying the food? Even if we can't catch them, we can still catch up to them. Leader, you don't have to be so anxious. Let us rest first. Hearing that, the head of the entourage's face darkened. He raised his hand and whipped the soldier. The man let out a blood-curdling scream as a long line of blood ran diagonally from one side of his forehead to the other side of his chin. He missed his footing and fell to the ground, rolling down the slope. There was a dull thud from below, and in an instant, there was no more sound. The head of the entourage showed no mercy at all. Instead, he said in a sinister tone, "Speed is the most important thing in war. How can we waste our time for such a reason? Meng Hun is a cunning man. Who knows what other tricks he has up his sleeve? Anyone who wants to rest will end up like him." The other soldiers kept quiet out of fear. They just lowered their heads and held their breaths, afraid that they would be whipped if they breathed too loudly. The head of the entourage snorted and said proudly, "Since no one objects, let's continue our journey and capture Meng Hun alive. As long as we capture Meng Hun and make a great contribution, I'll ask the county chief to reward you. Then you'll have a meteoric rise. You'll have money, women, and status." Tempted by the benefits, the other soldiers forgot about the rising fear in their hearts and suddenly felt a sense of heroism. After a while, the bandit stockade could be seen with the naked eye. There was still light over there. The head of the entourage laughed when he saw it. Pointing at the fire in the stockade, he said, "Meng Hun is such an idiot. He's trying to lure us away and buy time. He didn't expect that I had a trick up my sleeves. I left some people to guard the food. It's not that easy to get the food. If you want to take it, take your life." Seeing the bandit stockade getting closer and closer, the head of the entourage felt excited. He smelled blood in the air, which made him even more overjoyed. Obviously, this was the evidence that Meng Hun had led his men to launch a sneak attack. Maybe he was already wounded and had fled. The old hunter suddenly felt extremely uncomfortable when he was only 100 meters away from the stockade, as if a terrible beast was targeting his vital parts. This kind of vigilance had saved him many times in danger, and this time the feeling was stronger than ever. He stopped for a moment and suddenly bent over and rolled over. The old hunter felt that his hands and feet were numb and weak in panic, as if he would lose his life if he slowed down a bit. His action was so sudden that the head of the entourage came back to himself from his extreme excitement and became serious. "What are you doing?" As soon as he finished speaking, a strange sound came from the back of the troop. Screams kept coming from the back. The exhausted soldiers fell one after another, like rice being cut, one after another. The head of the entourage was frightened by the sudden change. All he could see was darkness. He could not see the enemy at all. It was as if the deadly arrows had come out of nowhere. After only 3 volleys of arrows, only 20 to 30 of his soldiers were left. The rest had been turned into porcupines. TSK. Cowards. The Mengs keep using such useless people. What a disgrace to Lord Meng. Jiang Pengji squatted on a branch. She wanted to shoot some arrows at the head of the entourage, but she did not expect him to be so cruel that he grabbed the corpses and used them as meat shields. A few stray arrows hit the corpses. TSK, TSK. It was rare to see someone so useless. Qiguan Rang's night vision was not that good. He heard Jiang Pengji's sarcasm and thought she was belittling the enemy. Jiang Pengji patted the trunk of the tree, which made a cracking sound. The troops heard the sound and put their hands to their mouths. They shouted, "Meng Gongyong of the previous dynasty is ridiculous." Qiguan Rang's heart sank. He was frightened by their thunderous voices. The descendants of today are worse than dogs. Someone's feather fan almost fell to the ground. Was it really okay to mock them so blatantly? At that moment, Qiguan Rang could not help but think of the coarse cloth Jiang Pengji left behind. It directly called the Mengs dogs. Jiang Pengji said to Qiguan Rang in distress, "I don't think it sounds imposing. Should I say something more infuriating?" Qiguan Rang was speechless. Wasn't that infuriating? If it were him, his brain would explode. Chapter 231. 232, Spitting Blood, 1. The big streaming room was full of talented people. For the first time, Jiang Pengji felt that the audience in the streaming room was not completely useless. At least they were good at swearing. Qiguan Rang was dumbfounded. He had never thought that the elegant aristocratic son of the aristocratic family would actually swear. Even though, he felt good when he heard it. He had never thought that Lu Shi would be such a Lang Jun. Qiguan Rang felt that he had opened the door to a whole new world. His troops shouted the same sentence in unison. Their voices echoed all over the mountain. The head of the entourage felt a sharp pain in his heart when he heard it. He almost choked on his breath. He looked at the dead bodies lying on the ground. His vision darkened. He staggered and almost fell on his butt. The old hunter crawled out of his hiding place. He did not dare to look back. His clothes were stained with the soldier's blood. The sticky and warm feeling on his hands scared him out of his wits. His face was as pale as paper. He crawled away on all fours. The reward for leading the way was tempting, but how could it compare to his own life? It would be a waste if he did not have the life to spend the money. He decided that he would never do such a dangerous job again. The head of the entourage was a man who cherished his life. Staying outside was not as safe as staying in the bandit village. At least there were buildings and shelters in the village to protect him from the arrows. However, when he and his subordinates left the dead bodies on the ground and arrived at the brightly lit bandit village, they were all shocked by the bloody scene inside. There were many more dead bodies than outside, and there were several arrows stuck in each of them. Some of the fatal wounds were not from the arrows, but they were still dead. They must have been killed after the battle. The head of the entourage, who had never cared about human lives, was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He could not say a word. "Chief. Chief. That looks like." Second Lang Jun, an injured soldier, was so scared that his legs were trembling. He pointed at a greenish-black corpse that emitted a strange aura with a trembling finger. "What?" The head of the entourage suddenly came to his senses. He quickly crawled toward the corpse. The corpse was very cold and hard. It gave off a rotten smell, but the face was still recognizable. At this moment, he finally understood why Meng Hun and his gang shouted, "The descendants lost their son and their food." Meng Liang's Lang Jun had already been killed. Touching the body, he felt like a piece of meat that had been frozen in an ice cellar. His heart sank deeper and deeper. Just by looking at the condition of the body, he could guess that Meng Liang had not been killed in the past few days. It was highly likely that he had already been killed when he was captured by Meng Hun. At this thought, the head of the entourage was so scared that his mind went blank. He felt a stabbing pain in his heart and spat out a mouthful of blood, but he swallowed it back. However, the matter that stimulated his nerves was not over yet. "Leader, there's no more food." The bandits' stronghold was empty, and there was no trace of the mountain-like grain bags. The head of the entourage could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyelids rolled and he passed out. How could he not vomit blood? How could he not pass out from anger? Meng Liang had been killed a long time ago, but Meng Hun had created the illusion that Meng Liang was still alive and cheated the Mengs of their food. After taking the food, he made up those humiliating words. It was as if he was afraid that people would not know that he had killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of their food. Meng Liang had killed his wife and daughter, so he took revenge. He killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of 3,000 dawn of food. The Mengs were proud of that, but he just stood there and watched like a monkey show. He must have secretly mocked the Mengs for being as stupid as pigs. This was really a loss of a son and a loss of food. That was so frustrating. "Do you feel good now?" On the other side, Jiang Pengji was riding high. "How can I not feel good?" Meng Hun was so excited that his hands were shaking. He knelt on the ground and his strong body yielded to her. "From now on, my life belongs to you, Lang Jun. You've given me a new life. You're like a second parent to me. In this life, I'm only willing to be at your beck and call. Even if you want my life, I'll do it without hesitation." Jiang Pengji stopped smiling and did not help him up. Instead, she said something meaningful, "Remember your vow. Remember your vow today. No matter what happens, I hope your loyalty will not change." Although it was convenient to be a man, Jiang Pengji did not want to keep it a secret. One day, she would openly tell the world that Lu Shi was a proper woman, and not a legitimate child of the Lu family. People treated men and women differently. Men might be praised for doing the same thing, but women would be criticized for doing it. Jiang Pengji was very curious. If Meng Hun knew she was a woman, would he still be loyal to her? Meng Hun said firmly, "If I break my vow, I'll be struck by lightning. Get up. It's cold on the ground." Jiang Pengji smiled and helped Meng Hun up. "Yes, it feels good. But have you thought about what to do after that?" Qiguan Rang, who was watching from the side, poured cold water on Meng Hun. "Since I dared to do this, I've already thought of a way out. I'll only leave some people in the farm and the rest will pretend to be bandits. They'll clean up the bandits and recruit useful bandits to expand the size of the troop." Jiang Pengji said calmly, "There are many bandits in the mountains in Hejian County. Even the government can't do anything about them. With this disguise, it'll be much easier to hide. The Mengs may send troops to retaliate." Qiguan Rang suddenly stopped. All the crimes were on Meng Hun's head. Even if the Mengs wanted to retaliate, they would dig deep to find Meng Hun, not the bandits in Hejian County. Meng Hun was not so kind as to go all the way to Hejian County to suppress bandits and increase the achievements of the Hejian County chief. TSK, so be it. No fool would stay in the same place after stirring up trouble. Jiang Pengji said indifferently, "In 2 days, when the situation is less tense, I plan to let Meng Hun leave Hejian County and escape to other places to divert the Meng's attention. We haven't even dealt with the mess in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. Where will we find so many troops to avenge our son?" It was already a troubled time. The Mengs still had a lot of problems to deal with. How could they want to find her? She would leave Hejin County in 2 or 3 months. If they could find her, she would admit defeat. Are we just going to leave the grain? Qiguan Rang asked. As for the grain, we'll store it in the cellar. I'll send someone to keep an eye on it. The most dangerous place is the safest. Those idiots all think that Meng Hun and his men have moved the grain away. Who would have thought that the grain was only moved from the surface to the underground? Chapter 232. Something bad happened. At dawn, the county chief of Hejin County was woken up by his servants from his bed. The county chief got up from his bed with sleepy eyes. What are you yelling for? You sleep first. I'll go and see what happened. The county chief's beloved concubine was also disturbed. She said in a coquettish tone, Master. It's not even dawn yet, something must have happened. The county chief of Hejin County was also angry. Anyone who was woken up from a sweet dream would be angry, not to mention the county chief of Hejin County, who had been living like a prince for many years. Gradually, he became a little angry in bed. He lifted the quilt, grabbed his clothes with one hand, and hurriedly went out. When he heard the servant's report, his remaining sleepiness disappeared instantly. He was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. What did you say? Say it again. Who did you say died? The Hejin County chief's eyes were wide open like a pair of copper bells. His face was full of shock. He spoke so fast that his tongue could be twisted. What happened last night? Tell me in detail. The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's collar and pulled him towards himself. The servant was so scared that he was trembling all over. As they were too close, the warm breath from the satrap's mouth hit his face. The servant became more nervous and repeated what he had just said, Master. Master. Something big happened yesterday. It is said that the Langjun of the Mengs in Tsangzhou was poisoned by someone. The county chief of Hejin County was also stunned. He wished that it was just a nightmare and not the bad news he was hearing. Who is the Langjun of the Mengs in Tsangzhou? If the Langjun of the Mengs was in trouble in Hejin County, he wouldn't be too worried. However, he had a bad feeling. He was afraid that the Langjun was an important figure in the Mengs. What is his identity? The servant gasped and said with difficulty, it was said that the Langjun of the Mengs was the second son of the Mengs. His name is Meng Liang. The second son of the Mengs. Hearing these 3 words was like a clap of thunder, directly causing him to be stunned on the spot. His legs went limp, and he actually lost his composure and sat on the ground. La Laoi. Are you alright? The servant was already afraid, and seeing the pillar of the family lose his composure, he became even more flustered. Help me up. The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's arm and stood up. At this moment, his mind was completely muddled. He deeply felt that his luck was terrible this year. What kind of Taisui did he offend? If not, why did the noblewoman of Hejin County almost die a few days ago, and now the second son of the Meng family was murdered? Master, what should we do now? The servant still remembered the scene a month ago when the head of the entourage broke into the city gate with his men and killed people. He didn't take the Hejin County chief seriously because he had a strong backer. If the Mengs want to make a fuss about it, I'm afraid, even though Meng Liang wasn't killed by the Hejin County chief, it was still someone who got into trouble in his territory. It was highly possible that the Meng family would implicate him in a fit of anger. The county chief of Hejin County was pulled back to reality by Meng Qi's words. He pulled himself together and pretended to be calm. What are you afraid of? I'm a righteous man. The disciple of the Meng family came to Hejin County without receiving any news. Can you blame me if something happens to him? Although he said so, the Hejin County chief wasn't confident that he wouldn't be implicated. In a panic, he just wanted to find someone to give him some advice. Suddenly, he thought of Lu Shi. He slapped his thigh and said loudly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to the Lu mansion." The servant nodded and said, "I'm going to prepare it now." But he didn't take 2 steps before he turned back. "Master, please forgive me. I almost forgot something else." The Hejin County chief asked impatiently, "What else is there? Say it in one breath. Don't waste time." The servant answered, "Yesterday, the guards at the city gate reported that there was a suspicious grain team." The Hejin County chief asked, "Are you saying that the grain team is the thief who killed Meng Liang?" "No. An old hunter came to the yamen this morning and got a shocking news. The grain that the grain team was escorting was prepared by the Mengs to exchange for Meng Liang with the thief. But the thief was vicious. He killed Meng Liang early and tricked the Mengs into sending the grain. The old hunter said that there was a bloody battle in the mountains last night. Half of the grain team was killed by the thief. There were only 20 or 30 soldiers left. They are all in the yamen now." The servant told the story without taking a breath. The county chief of Hejin County was stunned. He was shocked by the first news, but he had mixed feelings about the second news. He didn't like the Meng style, but he didn't expect the thief to be so bold. They killed people and cheated them of the grain. The Hejin County chief thought for a while and said, "Go to the yamen first, and then to the Lu mansion. Send someone to send the visiting card to the Lu County chief." It seemed like a peaceful day, but there was an undercurrent brewing in the dark that affected the pulse of Dongqing. The common people didn't notice it, but those who were well informed reacted. The survivors of the grain team were all from the Mengs, so they were tight-lipped. But there was also an old hunter who escaped from death. He didn't have a high level of awareness, so he didn't keep his mouth shut. With a little coercion and a little temptation, he would spill everything. Of course, it included the 2 sentences that the troops said to ridicule the Mengs. It was ridiculous that Meng Gongyong of the previous dynasty said that his descendants were worse than dogs. And the second sentence, which was even more infuriating, said that Meng Gongyong killed the enemy and brought peace to the world, but his descendants lost their children and grain. Even a blind man could tell that the culprit who kidnapped and murdered Meng Liang was trying to humiliate the Mengs. Because of the fear of the Mengs, people didn't dare to say it out loud. But they despised the thief in their hearts. They were one of the 4 noble families of Dongqing, but now they were being ridiculed by the thief. Thinking about how brave Meng Gongyong was in the past, it was sad that his descendants had come to this. For a while, the 2 sentences spread among the people as if they had wings. No matter what era the people were in, they were always interested in gossip. Their love for fun had never changed. Before the Hejin County chief came to visit, Lu Shi had heard several versions of the story. He was speechless. He knew who did it and he was mentally prepared. But when he heard the news, he was still touched. "Give me some advice. If even you can't do anything, the arrogant Mengs won't let me go." The Hejin County chief was so anxious that his mouth was bubbling. Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. He elegantly poured a cup of tea for the Hejin County chief and said slowly. Chapter 233. The Hejin County chief thought it made sense. 2. But he was only a county chief in name only. How could he have so many soldiers to catch the bandits? Just taking care of the guards and the county governor manor who were just there to keep up appearances was already a stretch for him. He sighed and said shamefully, "Brother Lu, you don't know. Even though I have the title of a county chief, I can't be compared to you." Without any real power in their hands, they had neither food nor manpower. How could they eliminate the bandits around them? How can I let the people live and work in peace? I have the heart but I can't do anything to those bandits. If there were people with food, why would they let the bandits grow and disturb the people? He also had great ambitions. He wanted to be a good county chief and work for the people. However, there were too many powerful Buddhas in Hejin County. As a powerless county chief, he could only be an obedient mute and retire peacefully. In the past, he had tried to gather people to suppress the bandits, but at that time, the bandits had already become very powerful and could not be mobilized. Lu Shi sighed helplessly. He seemed to sympathize with his old classmate. After a while, Lu Shi hesitated and said, "You and I have known each other for a long time and we are classmates. I can't just watch you being attacked by the Mengs and ignore it. The only way out is to catch the bandits who killed Meng Langjun. If you lack manpower, why don't you borrow some people from other families in the name of suppressing the bandits for the people? It's fine if no one gives you some food." The county chief of Hejin County looked embarrassed. This solution could solve the urgent situation, but he would lose face. The families that Lu Shi mentioned were the other gentry families in Hejin County. The county chief felt like he was begging for money. Seeing the county chief hesitate, Lu Shi said righteously, "My family doesn't have many resources. Even though we have some property, we are only the second branch. We can't take over the family, so there's a limit to what we can do. If you don't mind, I'm willing to give you 100 servants to help you suppress the bandits." The gentry families were big and had many servants. But the number of servants to guard the house was fixed and the number was fixed. After all, it didn't take too many people to look after the house. If there were too many, it would be equivalent to raising another mouth to eat without doing anything. Under normal circumstances, if the Hejin County chief went out to borrow people from other families, he wouldn't be able to borrow many. Of course, the wealthy families that secretly raised private armies were an exception. 100 people was a huge number and a generous one. How could the Hejin County chief not be shocked? Even the previous few times when they were suppressing the bandits, they only mobilized 100 or 200 soldiers. The county chief of Hejin County calmed down and relaxed his frown. If it weren't for the inappropriate situation, he would have laughed out loud. "Brother, you've really helped me a lot. Regardless of whether we can catch those thieves or not, I will owe you a big favor." Lu Shi also broke into a smile and said a few words humbly. He looked like he was doing it for the sake of brotherhood. The Hejin County chief naturally had to return the favor after receiving such a big favor. The 100 people were like 100 mouths. The Lus had already sent people, they couldn't ask them to give back food. Therefore, he decided to pay a visit to the other landowning households later and ask them if they could give him some food or not. After all, to these landowning households, people were more valuable than food. Anything that could be solved with food was nothing. Training servants required energy, money, and material resources. If the people they lent out were lost, they would suffer a great loss. In comparison, it was more cost-effective to send people off with a batch of food. With Lu Shi taking the lead, the other families couldn't be too stingy. They would more or less give some food. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it was worth it if they could get through this crisis. The Hejin County chief felt better when he thought about it. After Jiang Pengji finished dealing with the follow-up matters, she received a message from the gatekeeper asking her to see Lu Shi. "Father, what can I do for you?" Jiang Pengji was a bit confused. Lu Shi wouldn't scold her because of what happened last night, would he? "Father has found a few free suckers for you." Jiang Pengji was confused. "What suckers?" Lu Shi smiled and took a sip of tea. He told her about the visit from the Hejin County chief. "You should have 100 people in your troops, right? If you are willing, you can lend them to the Hejin County chief. He will be in charge of the troops, but you can make all the decisions secretly. You can divide the spoils of war. As for the captured bandits, I will talk to him and give him a clear path." Jiang Pengji had secretly suppressed the bandits and recruited usable bandits into the troops. It was a good idea, but it was not a good way to explain if they were discovered. She wanted to use this opportunity to give her a clear path and get a call from the Hejian County chief. Of course, the 100 people belonged to his daughter, so it was not appropriate for Shi to make the decision for her. If Jiang Pengji was not willing, Shi planned to send 100 people from his guards to the Hejian County chief. Jiang Pengji listened and thought about it carefully. She was a bit tempted. Giving her a clear path was only one of the benefits. The other was that during the suppression of the bandits, all the expenses of the troops would be paid by the public account. What did it mean by paying the public account? The chief of Hejian County collected food from various aristocratic families and used it all to feed Jiang Pengji's troops. Jiang Pengji didn't have to spend a single cent. Although some of the spoils of war would be taken by the chief of Hejian County, she had more choices about the captured bandits and even other benefits. In layman's terms, it was using other people's money to feed one's own troops. There were many gentry families in Hejian, so they had more money and food. No matter how stingy those people were, they would pay a little for the sake of their reputation. The total amount of food was very considerable. Jiang Pengji felt that they could eat some of it and carry some of it away. Of course. After all, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. The bandits near Hejian must be eliminated. In the past, we could only do it secretly. Now we have a good reason to do it, and there will be people who will pay for the expenses. Wouldn't it be unfair to myself if I don't accept such a good offer? It was not easy to start from scratch. One would not know the cost of food if one did not manage the household. The scale of the troops was still small. When the number of people reached thousands or even tens of thousands, she would not be able to feed so many people with her current wealth. Therefore, it was very important to increase income and reduce expenditure. Shi's move helped her solve a problem and saved her a lot of expenses. He pressed his lips together as if he wanted to suppress the smile on his face, but the gentle smile in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. Since you have agreed, I will inform the Hejian County chief tomorrow. Shi paused and then asked in a low voice, "Have you cleaned up the aftermath of the incident with Meng Liang?" "Father, don't worry. It has been done," Jiang Pengji answered with certainty. The father and son looked at each other and smiled. They both saw the slyness in each other's eyes. At that moment, the news of Meng Liang, the second son of the Mengs, being murdered spread like wildfire. Chapter 234. 235, Spitting Blood. 4. The Hejian County chief put aside his pride and collected more than 1,000 don of food and various weapons. As he had expected, no one except Shi was willing to give them to others. They chose to pay with money. He thought that Shi's men were the elites he had raised in Hu County, so he was very confident about killing the bandits. He organized the money into a booklet and handed it to Shi with both hands. He also told Shi that he was not good at dispatching and hoped that Shi would pay more attention to him. After all, they were Shi's soldiers. Although Shi said that he would lend them to him, it was not appropriate for the Hejian County chief to interfere. Of course, Shi wouldn't refuse the supplies that were delivered to his doorstep. He politely declined them and accepted them under the urging of the Hejian County chief. With a turn of his head, he handed them over to his daughter. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She had only lied to them and a lot of food and money had been delivered to her. She finally understood why the Lus were so rich. She did not see through her thoughts. She hinted, "The Hejian County chief can't eat or sleep well. He is eager to see the bandits killed." Jiang Pengji's heart skipped a beat. She understood the meaning of his words and nodded in response. "Father, don't worry. I know what to do." They had to kill the bandits, but she had the final say on who to kill. She just needed to show a good record. The Hejian County chief would probably be grateful and think that Shi was a good friend and that Shi was a hero. Anyway, the father and son would take all the material and reputation benefits. Others would be happy even if they suffered a loss. Lu Shi was worried. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. The tallest tree on the shore will be destroyed by the current. People are stupid. Those who are outstanding are easy to be envied and criticized. As your father, I don't want you to suffer such grievances. Therefore, when necessary, Lanting can keep a low profile and avoid the limelight of others' fights. You should focus on the result. There is no need to fight for a temporary victory. Others did not know about her future, but Lu Shi knew her ambition and talent. He saw with his own eyes that the child could still be free and unfettered after hurting the Mengs. If it were someone else, would they be able to do that? She had already built a foundation by developing steadily. Her future development would be smoother. Once she was fully fledged, all she needed was a fortuitous encounter, and she would be able to rise to the top in an instant, shocking the people of the world and shaking the entire court. Father, don't worry. I'm not a brainless brute. Jiang Pengji answered with a smile. Lu Shi nodded his head in satisfaction, but then realized that there was something wrong with his words. She was his daughter. While Jiang Pengji was preparing to exterminate the bandits and catch the murderer who killed the Lang Jun of the Mengs, the head of the entourage of the Mengs was escorting Meng Liang's coffin back to Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. She wore a white silk mourning dress, a white banner hung high, paper money fluttered in the wind, and the soul guiding bell rang all the way. Meng Liang had been dead for quite some time. In order to prevent maggots from rotting and to preserve his body in perfect condition, they had specially made a special coffin and placed a large amount of ice inside. They were rushing to send Meng Liang's body back to his homeland before the beginning of summer. However, it was difficult to speed up while carrying a coffin. It should have taken them only half a month to travel at top speed, but it took them a month and a half. They had lost count of how many times they had waited for a month and a half. By then, Jiang Pengji had expanded the number of troops to 1,000 after exterminating the bandits. That was the result of her being picky. If she had slightly loosened the selection criteria, she would have had about 2,000 troops. In a month and a half, they had conquered more than 20 bandits' villages and secretly used them as strongholds. They had looted countless spoils of war. She had handed over all her antiques, calligraphy, and paintings. She had kept all her food, cotton, and money. The Hejin County chief was well aware of her actions, but he did not say anything. In that era, knowledge was priceless. The value of calligraphy, paintings, and antiques far exceeded the value of food. However, that rule did not apply to Jiang Pengji. She knew that only by strengthening herself would she be able to survive in this chaotic world. Antiques, calligraphy, and paintings would all be hers in the future. Therefore, she handed over those things that looked expensive but were just old rolls of paper in her eyes without hesitation. She did not care, but the Hejin County chief felt that she was too honest and upright. She had suffered a great loss without saying a word. She had benefited from it. He was especially merciful to the captured bandits. It was up to the Lus to decide how to deal with them. The only regret was that they had not caught the bandit who killed Meng Liang, Meng Hun. But the Hejin County chief felt comfortable when he thought that the hidden dangers around Hejin County were decreasing day by day. He was also secretly envious of Lu Shi. Looking at the elite troops of Lu Shi and his own troops, the gap was too big. The former was serious about exterminating bandits. Blood flowed like a river at every turn. The latter was chased by bandits and could only let them grow. As the size of the troops increased, Meng Hun temporarily hid behind the scenes. Su Ku had to shoulder the double workload. Su Ku was so busy every day that he had no time to rest. If Qiguan Rang did not occasionally come to help him, he would have been exhausted. When he finally had some free time, he turned around and found that his Langjuan's troop had already expanded to 1,000 people. 1,000 private troops was nothing in front of any noble family. But considering the time it took for the troops to be established and the current situation, it could only be described as incredible. Even though Su Ku had seen the development of the troops with his own eyes, he was still a little stunned. Rang, Xiaoyu has been busier lately. Qiguan Rang and Wei Yuan's daughter's wedding date was set in 8 months. Although it was a long time, they still had to go through a complicated ceremony. 8 months was considered a rush. If Wei Yuan was not in a hurry to get his daughter married, it could have been delayed for more than a year. Qiguan Rang was now the future groom. He was in high spirits and the haze between his eyebrows was swept away. It's not as leisurely as Wenjing, Su Ku said lightly. He and Qiguan Rang had been interacting more and more, and they had many common topics. Eventually, they became friends. You and Master Gongqiao have already decided to choose Lang Jun. Why haven't you expressed your opinion yet? Jiang Pengji's secret forces were developing rapidly, but there was no hidden danger of an unstable foundation. Instead, it was very solid. This was inseparable from Su Ku's hard work. However, one person's ability was limited. He only had so much energy. When there were only 100 people in the troops, he was in charge of the internal affairs and Meng Hun was in charge of the external affairs. They could manage the troops in an orderly manner. Now, Meng Hun could not show his face in public because of the sensitive timing. A lot of work was piled on him. Plus, the troops had expanded 10 times, so naturally, his work had increased by more than 10 times. There was no salary increase, and he had no colleagues to share his work with. Chapter 235. Su Ku was a smart man. He could tell that Qiguan Rang liked his Lang Jun. If that was the case, why didn't he join them? If he joined them now, he could immediately push all the internal affairs to Qiguan Rang. He would be completely free. Su Ku worked overtime every day, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He was a young man who looked tired all day. Those who didn't know him would think that he was having sex every night. It's not the right time. Qiguan Rang forced a smile, but he wasn't good at that kind of expression. The curve of his mouth was stiff. Time? Su Ku asked, isn't this the right time? How could adding flowers to a brocade be compared to providing timely help? How could the insignificant friendship with Lang Jun be compared to when she had a firm foothold in the future? Qiguan Rang glanced at Su Ku and said, Dongqing still exists, and the royal family still has some power. It's not the right time yet. Su Ku was silent for a while. He vaguely understood what Qiguan Rang was implying. As long as Dongqing still existed, Jiang Pengji couldn't develop her business freely. The shop was small, and Su Ku could manage it all by himself. There was no point for Qiguan Rang to join them now. Other than sharing Su Ku's workload and helping him get off work on time every day. He would wait for the time when Jiang Pengji really needed him. If it was someone else, he would have been furious if he showed the intention to assist Jiang Pengji but refused to join them. What made Qiguan Rang gratified was that Jiang Pengji could completely understand and support his modesty. It was a tacit understanding between him and Jiang Pengji. They were both teachers and friends, and they got along well. Because of that, Qiguan Rang would occasionally come over to help Su Ku with some of his work. Su Ku's face turned pale. He said gloomily, I can only hope that the time comes soon, otherwise, according to his Langjuan's development, he would definitely die of exhaustion. His Lang Jun was too good at delegating work. Laymen don't care about professionals. Qiguan Rang stopped him from saying anything. Qiguan Rang looked at Su Ku and teased, Xiaoyu, you're at the age to get married. Why don't you take some time to think about it? No matter how unreasonable Lu Lang Jun is, he can't possibly ignore his subordinate's marriage, right? Seeing that the young man was dating, getting married, and having a baby, she should at least give him a few days off. Qiguan Rang did not want to join the team at this time because he saw the heavy workload and wanted to relax for a few more days. After hearing this, Su Ke's face turned red and pale. He seemed to be in a dilemma. When Zheng's suggestion is really, could he say that Qiguan Rang was very similar to his Langjun in some aspects? If Jiang Pengji knew how busy Su Ke was, she would probably say the same thing. Suddenly, Su Ke changed his mind. He hoped that the time for Qiguan Rang to join them would come later. He could not imagine what would happen if his Langjun and Qiguan Rang got together. He would be the one who would be exhausted. Qiguan Rang pursed his lips and said, "Xiaoyu, you don't have to be so depressed. Once Lu Longjuan's name spreads, there will naturally be talents coming to visit." Su Ke still had a hopeless expression on his face. Wait until then. He guessed that he had already died of exhaustion at his post. Although Jiang Pengji was a hands-off boss, it did not mean that she did not care about anything. Sans Hisongshu Ningshi, the streamer has been going shopping for the past 2 days. I feel a little bored, Wuxia was Hao Liaoqiao, #propping chin. The streamer is not a 10,000-year-old primary school student. There will be incidents wherever she goes. Recently, the streamer has been watching all kinds of bandit suppression series. It was exciting at first, but it got boring after a while. Now, shopping and drinking are like watching a gourmet show. A month and a half had passed, and the streaming room's upper limit was still 10,000 people. Jiang Pengji streamed every day. With the flow of people in the streaming room and all kinds of gifts, she had accumulated 986,000 points of popularity. In a few days, she would break through the million mark. The system looked at the popularity points enviously. It tried to persuade Jiang Pengji to use them to increase the level of the streaming room, but she had heartlessly rejected it. In the end, the system was so angry that it could not do anything to her. Tudu Feichio, I think it's okay. Anyway, I think the streamer's streaming is good. Also, think about the pile of work on Su Ke's desk. If the streamer streamed how to deal with them, I think it would be even more boring. When the bullet screen was sent, the audience in the streaming room was silent for a second. Then, they all laughed, ha ha ha, because they felt sorry for Su Ke. Sherry de Dali, Su Ke is really unlucky to have a Zhou like the streamer. Kojiao Xiaofan, if I had a boss like her, would strongly request 5 insurances, 1 housing fund, and most importantly, a raise in salary. Jiang Pengji sat at a noodle stall by the street, eating bland noodles. Her eyes were secretly looking at the screen, but her ears were listening to the conversation of the customers. She was multitasking. She added a bullet screen from the streamer. Streamer V, I just passed by the cloth shop. Didn't I ask Takshu to pick some new cloth for him and his aunt? Jiang Pengji thought about it carefully. It seemed that Su Ke's current living standard was not bad, and he did not have any other needs. She asked the servants to prepare some cloth, rice, and silver for him and sent them all to his aunt. Is that a raise in salary? Yinuagia Zhuga Qinma, that makes sense. Su Ke is speechless. But you forgot the most important thing, the vacation. It was good to give him a raise, but he did not have time to enjoy the money he earned. He was so tired all day. Su Ke still deserved to be distressed. Jiang Pengji coughed in her heart. Streamer V, as the saying goes, capable people do more work. Now we are short of manpower. Write down the vacation for him first and put it together later. She said it nicely, but not only Su Ke, but even the audience in the streaming room did not believe her. Their Longjuan's daily activities were either suppressing bandits or eating and drinking. As her subordinate, how could Su Ke not feel bad? Regarding this, Jiang Pengji expressed that she was wronged. Suppressing bandits and making trouble was true, but she did not admit to eating and drinking. Every day, she went out shopping with a proper purpose. After finishing the noodles, Jiang Pengji took out 3 copper coins to pay. The other customers also left. Back at the mansion, Jiang Pengji went to the study and took out the property account book that Su Ku had made. All kinds of items were carefully categorized and looked very clear. She put down the book and took the bamboo paper from the corner of the desk. There were all kinds of data listed on it. Tudu Feichio, I haven't been here for a few days. What are you reading? Chapter 236. 237, Vomiting Blood, 6, Let You See a Baby, Musician Zhuge Qinma, I don't even need to help you to the toilet. The streamer's handwriting is elegant and flamboyant, but to put it bluntly. What the hell is she writing? How can you understand it? You live up to your ID. Jiang Pengji's handwriting was just like her personality. She did whatever she wanted. In the past, she would follow Lu Shi's handwriting and write in an orderly manner. But ever since she used charcoal to write and draw on coarse cloth, she seemed to have opened a door to a whole new world. Her handwriting became wilder and wilder. She completely let go of herself, and her handwriting was even more sloppy than wild cursive. Musician Zhuge Qinma, you're flattering me. Tudu Feichio, if this is really the record for the grain price. Does it mean that the streamer's plan is about to begin? In the streaming room, even though the content was boring, the passion of the viewers did not diminish. As the streaming room gained fame, more and more people believed in it. The viewers found it harder to watch the stream. Every seat was hard to get. Even if you had been single for 30 years and had a 100 megabit internet speed, you might not be able to get one. What was worse was that the streaming room could not be broadcasted. If the viewers wanted to watch the stream, they would have to wait for the video to be broadcasted on Baidu the next day. Tudu Feichio could be considered a veteran in the streaming room. He kept up with the updates. He recorded everything that happened around the streamer during the stream and even compiled a booklet for it. As soon as he heard that the grain price had skyrocketed, he immediately thought of Jiang Pengji's plan to suppress the grain price. It was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Jiang Pengji shook her head. It's not the right time. She had been walking the streets and alleys. She had visited the teahouses, eateries, and taverns. She had heard the people talking about the recent gossip. More and more of it was related to the civil unrest in Tsang Prefecture and Meng County. But their news had not been confirmed, so the spread was limited. Otherwise, why would the grain price have only doubled? Jiang Pengji murmured, it's too early to make a move. The rumors are still brewing. There's still some time before they really explode. When the time comes, the people will panic and rush to the grain stores to buy grain. The grain price will not be the same as it is today. Some of the people would believe the baseless rumors, but the doubling of the grain price would make them hesitate. If Jiang Pengji started her plan now, her family's grain store would be emptied by another force. When the food shortage started, most of the people would have to grit their teeth and buy the food that had skyrocketed in price. So, she was not in a hurry. When the government of Hejian County confirmed the news of the civil unrest in Tsangzhou, the people would panic and find that they could no longer afford to buy food. That would be the time for Jiang Pengji to strike. She took a look at Su Ku's statistical report and found that they had achieved great results in suppressing the bandits in the past month. The money collected was exchanged for food, which was purchased from the nearby Zisong County at regular prices. It added up to about 1,500 dong. The 3,000 dong she had extorted from the Mengs and the 1,300 dong the Hejian County chief had collected from various aristocratic families. After deducting the food consumed during this period of time, she still had 5,500 dong left, which was much more than she had expected. Takshu, go and tell the butler to call the shopkeeper of the grain store over here. The second branch of the Lus owned all kinds of stores. Half of them were Gu Min's dowry, and the other half were bought by Lu Shi over the years. The Lus had 3 grain stores in Hejian. They were located in different areas and had different customers. Daily necessities such as rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea did not make a lot of money, but every person needed them, and the demand was huge. Therefore, the profits of those stores were moderate every year. As long as the shopkeepers followed the rules, it would be difficult for them to make a loss. The 3 shopkeepers were a little scared when they were suddenly summoned by their master. They were afraid that they had done something wrong and would be fired. Don't be so nervous. I called you here to ask you some questions. Jiang Pengji sat at the head of the table and asked one of them in a cold voice, "How's the business these days?" The shopkeeper answered respectfully, "The business is okay. The people are worried about the civil unrest in Zhangzhou, so the grain is selling smoothly." "Is there anything else?" The shopkeeper was startled. He thought carefully and said, "Apart from some scattered purchases, there are many big businesses." The so-called big businesses were actually other grain stores planning to buy in bulk from them. But the shopkeepers were not stupid. They knew that the price of grain was rising fast, so they could wait for a while and sell slowly after the price rose to another level. Anyway, no matter where the grain was, they would not lose money. The only difference was whether they could make more or less. "You sold the grain?" Jiang Pengji asked. In order to have a continuous supply, the grain stores would more or less have some grain in storage. The shopkeeper hurriedly said, "I wouldn't dare to do that. Of course, I have to ask my master before I make a decision." Jiang Pengji nodded with satisfaction and said, "Just follow the price of grain these days. If the people want to buy in bulk, you can sell it as usual. If someone wants to buy in bulk, you don't have to ask for permission. Just say yes." The 3 shopkeepers hesitated. In their opinion, it was a good opportunity to make money. They should limit the sale and wait for the grain price to rise before selling. It would definitely be more profitable than selling it now. Jiang Pengji did not intend to explain. She only said coldly, "Just do as I say. I will have other instructions when the time comes." All merchants were unscrupulous. Merchants were born with the instinct to pursue profits. No matter what era it was, this had never changed. But for Jiang Pengji, the main purpose of the plan was not to make money, but to gain fame. Or rather, she wanted to earn both money and fame. To others, it seemed impossible, but the opportunity was right in front of her. She had to seize it. The 3 shopkeepers looked at each other. But Jiang Pengji was their master. Lu Shi had never cared about the family affairs, Madame who had always allowed Jiang Pengji to do whatever she wanted, and the second lady had no reason to support her. The shopkeepers had no choice but to listen to her. "Yes." The 3 of them replied in unison. "You may leave now. Remember to report back if anything happens." When Hejian County was in turmoil due to the civil unrest in Tsang Prefecture, the Meng's entourage finally arrived at Meng County in Tsang Prefecture before the weather got hotter. Meng County was a wasteland. The streets were empty, and there was not a soul to be seen. The sun hung high in the sky, and everyone felt a chill. The white banners fluttered in the wind, making a rustling sound. It made the scene even more desolate. Even though the Meng County chief's mansion had been burned down by Meng Han, Meng Zhan still had a luxurious mansion. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.